Can the New York Jets put a stop to the Minnesota Vikings undefeated streak? And can the New Orleans Saints get back on track against the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs in prime time? All that and more coming up on the Ultimate NFL Pregame Show, which starts right now.
It's the Ultimate NFL Pregame Show. Every team, every game, every angle. The local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network going head-to-head on every matchup. It's the Ultimate NFL Pregame Show. Unprecedented insight, unrivaled passion, and unsurpassed knowledge. It's the Ultimate NFL Pregame Show. The Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Week 5 in the NFL is here, and we've got everything you need to know heading into the weekend from the local experts across the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher. I'm the host of Locked On Ravens and one of the many NFL experts on our network. So from the primetime game of Saints and Chiefs on Monday night to the big 4:25 p.m. matchup in Los Angeles to why the New York Jets could potentially end the Minnesota Vikings undefeated streak. We're going to go game by game to make you the most informed fan for game day. And we have a ton to dive into. Hey, we got bye weeks this week, so not as many games, but still a bunch of great matchups. So we're going to start with a look at the 1 p.m. Eastern time slate of games. And kicking us off this week is the New York Jets and the Minnesota Vikings abroad in London, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. So an early kickoff, and Aaron Rodgers and the Jets looking to end Sam Darnold's undefeated streak as the starter of the Vikings. So Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings, John Butchko of Locked On Jets, get you ready for game time.
Moving on here with the crossover Thursday episode. This is where if we wanted to predict the game, you can go ahead. I don't really like doing score predictions. I think they kind of are just arbitrary numbers more often than not. But I like to predict what I think this game will come down to. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the guy who very famously is not Garrett Wilson, and that is Justin Jefferson. I'm sure Jets fans heard about that. If you saw that quote, that was when the Vikings were about to play the 49ers and the Jets played the 49ers week 1. Somebody asked him about like, hey, does it help you to watch how they played the Jets to prepare? And he was like, yeah, of course. But also they played the Jets differently. People play me differently than they play other receivers. And that was the I'm not Garrett Wilson, because Garrett Wilson doesn't get doubled every single time all day long. I don't think, right? Or maybe he doesn't. That's why Alan Lazard is popping off. But what the Jets like to do is man up, because they got the dudes to do it, because they've got, in my opinion, the best corner in the league. Maybe Pat Surtain. I'll entertain that, but those are the two for me. And will they man that guy up on Justin Jefferson?
Yeah, throughout the entire offseason, the Jets have talked about how Sauce Gardner, they were going to use him to shadow the other team's best receiver more frequently. And this is the kind of game you do it for. The Jets in the past under Robert Saleh, and this goes back to 2021 before they had Sauce Gardner, have not done it a whole lot. It was essentially, and even, for Sauce Gardner's first 2 years, he'd go to the left side, DJ Reed would go to the right side. And part of it is they have a lot of trust in DJ Reed, who's been an excellent free agent signing from Seattle. They got him a couple of years ago. But this is the kind of game where you do it. And I think for the Jets, I think this is one of the keys to the game, is that they should make sure Sauce Gardner is following Justin Jefferson wherever he goes in this one, because that's going to be Justin Jefferson's a tough matchup. I think as much as you may trust DJ Reed, this is the kind of game you get Sauce. This is the kind of game you drafted Sauce Gardner for, because you're going to need everything at your disposal to slow this guy down, especially the way this Vikings passing game is functioning at this point and how integral he is to it.
Yeah, and DJ Reed, also one of the best CB2s in the game, I think. I think that secondary is the thing about the Jets that's scariest, is that if those guys can be like clamps on the outside, and you're playing 9-on-9 or even 10-on-10 if you want DJ Reed to be part of his own thing, that's so much harder as an offense to move the ball. If you could just take that one bit of entropy out, especially if you can get the best player in the game neutralized with your best player. But here's the thing. Nobody's done it. Nobody has done it. I don't remember what the Jets did last time. I'm actually trying to look that up on Next Gen Stats right now, how the Jets approached it last time. But Sauce was a rookie, so it's probably different. But the last team, well, now the team that tried it was the Texans. They tried to put Derek Stingley on him, the other corner that went above Sauce. Didn't go great. 34-7. Went poorly. And they did try to man him up for a little bit. They started zoning off later in the game when things got out of hand. But other than that, you got to go back like 2 years to Marshawn Lattimore. Last time the Vikings were in London, they tried to man him up. And it's Marshawn Lattimore. Like, that's a good corner. Totally smoked. Otherwise, everybody's been too high. Everybody's been bracketing, doubling, trying to get horizontal brackets, diagonal brackets, whatever their coverage likes to do. They're picking out, where is 18? We got to get 2 on him. If the Jets have the courage and Sauce has the juice, I think this might be the only team in the league. Like, if the Jets can't do it, nobody can do it.
And I think the Jets have to try and do it because, as I mentioned, they've had a lot of issues against the run. And, I think that they're going to have to bring that extra safety down to try and help on Aaron Jones, who I know is off to an outstanding start this season. I mean, I think, look, Justin Jefferson's the best receiver in the NFL. I'd be lying to you if I said that matchup isn't terrifying for the Jets. But when you have Sauce Gardner and you have this kind of run defense and you look at the way the Vikings are running the football, the Jets have to send extra resources to try and stop the run game. And I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't know how Sauce Gardner is going to hold up against Jefferson. Jefferson might be the one receiver who can beat him, but I think based on the way this Jets team is built, their strengths and weaknesses, this is what you have to do. I mean, this is why you have Sauce Gardner, because you don't have a great defensive line right now. So you have a great corner. You have to lean on the great corner.
Yeah, so just looking at it at Next Gen Stats from the last game, they played sides, which I'm going to guess the Jets like to do a lot, where, Sauce is just on the defense left, DJ Reed on the defense right, and you say, come at me, whoever you're going to come at me with. We're not scared of your matchups because we trust both of these guys. So you might not get a lot of Jefferson on Sauce if that's the thing you do. You might put him on DJ Reed and say, let's take this matchup away unless you want to have him actually shadow, which would be different. But also, again, Sauce was a rookie 2 years ago and he's a superstar bona fide now. This isn't his first year anymore. So that could be something. But what do you think this game is going to come down to? What's your X factor here?
I think that the Jets need to force turnovers in this game. This offense is still very much working things out, and I think that this Minnesota defense is a tough matchup. Now, I think there are some things the Jets can do offensively. I think you need to see more Braylon Allen for the Jets on offense, and your listeners, if they're college football fans, may recognize him because Braylon Allen's from Big Ten country, played at Wisconsin.
Sure.
Really very promising rookie. And Breece Hall, who I think is a phenomenal young back, just in a slump right now. I also think Braylon Allen might be stylistically better for this Vikings defense because Breece Hall is kind of like a slasher. He looks for his hole, waits for things to develop. I think against this Vikings defense, you just need a guy who's going to move forward, be more of a north and south runner. That's where Braylon Allen is. But I think this Jets offense is still trying to sort things out, and I think they need to force turnovers. My experience with Sam is obviously different from yours. We know that Sam.
This is how it goes. So the Vikings, I think they're like tied for third in the league in takeaways, and they're second in the league in giveaways. So there've been wild games with a lot of. They've won or tied the turnover battle. It's been balanced, but it's always been like 2-2, 3-4. Like they are definitely still not protecting the ball as well as you would want them to. But the defense is forcing turnovers as well. So the turnover battle is a pretty good key to this one. There's this stat that's very famous in the Vikings world now, that the Vikings under Kevin O'Connell are 21-0 when they tie or lead the turnover battle. As long as they don't lose the turnover battle, they don't lose the game. But it is Sam Darnold. It's still Sam Darnold, okay? It's not a totally different guy. It's still a guy you know. He's in there. He's a little bit more repressed, okay? He's a little bit more of a childhood memory, but he's in there.
Maybe seeing the green and white will bring it out of him.
Yeah, well, the first game was at MetLife against the Giants, so you kind of thought maybe bad memories would come, but no, he played great in that game. But we'll see what happens in London. This game comes down to.
I think you can always look to special teams. Jets lost their game. Look, I'm not saying the Jets lost this game because of special teams, but Greg Zuerlein did miss a field goal. Zuerlein's been a little shaky. He made 3 field goals, but a bunch of them were ones he just snuck through. Jets special teams has historically been a big positive for the team. This year, it's been a little bit more up and down. They haven't gotten big results from their return game. I think whenever you're talking about a game that could be tight, special teams could make a difference. It did make. I don't want to blame it on Zuerlein because the Jets messed up so many other things last week. But I think you always look to the special teams battle because that could end up swinging the game one way or another.
Special teams make special teams. For me, I also want to focus on Will McDonald. If that is truly the Jets' like focused pass rusher, and I'm going to guess that if you looked at the pass rushes, you're going to see him on a lot of one-on-ones, trying to get his matchups right, moving him around. Or do they move him around? Do you know? Or do they just let him kind of rush off the same side against the same guy all day?
I think Jets guys line up all over the place.
Okay.
But
Saleh likes to move him around a little bit.
Yeah,
Because when he was in San Francisco, like Nick Bosa would just be like on a guy. But I don't know. Two schools of thought where like sometimes you want him to be able to like play the long game and go up against the same tackle all day and like set him up and bring up a diversion at the right time and like kind of play this long like battle against a guy. And then sometimes you just want to move him around and say, but what if you rush against the guard? But the Vikings have had bookend tackles all year that have been playing phenomenal football. Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill. And they've been up against quite the gauntlet. Nick Bosa, Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson, Rashawn Gary handed him probably his worst game in a while, at least of the season. So unless they want to try to get Will Anderson inside, Will McDonald inside, that's going to be, I think, a difficult matchup and one that makes me feel pretty good about the Vikings here. I think that I see why the Vikings are favorite, but also, I mean, they're 4-0. They're white hot, and the Jets are coming off this like super ugly loss. So I get why the vibes are the way they are. Do you have any, whether it's a score prediction or a vibes prediction, do you have anything to round this thing out with?
I think the Jets need to play at a much higher level than they have in the past 4 weeks. They played very well in the Thursday night game, week 3 against New England, but this team's 2-2. This team, in many ways, is lucky to not be 1-3 because they did not play well week 2 against Tennessee. And when you started the season, expectations were very high for this team. All around New York, there was talk. Is this team going to contend for a Super Bowl? Week 1, they played the team that almost won the Super Bowl last year. They don't look like they belong on the same field. Week 2, they play a Tennessee team that's frankly not very good, and it was a very touch and go game. New England, they did look like a very good team, but last week that was a game most people penciled in as a win before it started. So I think it's a tough matchup for the Jets, and I think that the Jets need to play at a much higher level because even though they got that win week 2, if they play that way if they play the way they did in their week 2 win against Tennessee against Minnesota this Sunday, they're going to get blown out. If they play the way they did against the 49ers week 1, they're going to get blown out. If they play the way they did against Denver week 4, they're going to get blown out. This team has not, for the most part, looked anything close to a Super Bowl contender, and now they're going up against the team, the hottest start in the league. So what I'd say is that I think the Jets can win. I mean, some of it might be, the trip to London's always a bit of an X factor. How do teams respond?
It's an equalizer, yeah.
Sam, there's going to be the question, can Sam keep it up? Does Sam have an off game? That could be an equalizer. But I just think that if this Jets team doesn't play at a higher level, they're not going to win this game.
Big shout out to Luke and to John. For more on John, more on Luke, check them out over at Locked On Jets and Locked On Vikings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Buffalo Bills are coming off of a brutal Sunday Night Football loss to the Baltimore Ravens, and the Houston Texans picked up a big Week 4 win over the Jacksonville Jaguars. Those two teams match up in a big 1 p.m. game, and Joe Marino of Locked On Bills plus John Hickman of Locked On Texans take you through big keys, big storylines, and so much more.
Crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. I'm Joe Marino, host of Locked On Bills, joined by John Hickman, the host of Locked On Texans. We're here to break down the keys to victory for each team. One team's getting to 4-1, the other one's getting to 3-2. John, if the Texans are getting to 4-1, what are the keys to success on Sunday afternoon?
They are dominating offensively. I think the Bills are going to be able to put up points. I think they can, lead this game with at least 21, 24 points on the scoreboard. But for the Houston Texans, the inconsistencies offensively, this is not a team you can play around with. Josh Allen is not a quarterback that you can play around with. So offensively, you're going to have to do your part. Check this out. Against the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Jags broke off a 55-yard run, got to the 4-yard line, didn't score. Defensively, the Texans did their job. 3 drives, of no points allowed. That's a good day. That's a good moment But the Texans offense, it took them to their last drive to score some points. And you can't do that with the Bills because Josh Allen and Joe Brady and those weapons and James Cook, they're going to find a way to put the ball in the end zone. So for Houston, when your defense is giving you those opportunities, they're getting that opposing offense off the field. You got to come in, you got to step up and score points. So I think this is going to be one of those games where if Houston doesn't score points like they should, and I mean at least 24 points, they're going to lose this game. Of course, we can count on Nico Collins, but for Stephon Diggs as a, not going home game, but the Bills are coming to Houston, he's going to have to perform well. Tank Dell will be coming back off of an injury he missed last week. He's going to have to be a part of this offensive explosion. And Bobby Schlock in his offensive game plan has to find a way to get Dalton Schultz involved. He has been a very good player for the Houston Texans, but through 4 weeks, he has been, in a lot of ways, forgettable. That can't happen Sunday. So I think the Texans offensively, they're going to have to run the ball, open up your playbook, take some of those shots down the field, but specifically attack the middle area of the Bills' defense. Find ways to get some yak yards and get the ball in the end zone.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to score. I think that's something we're going to agree on. I think you get 28 points. I think that's going to give you a chance to win the game. So I know you were saying 24, 21. I think this is probably a first to 28, in my opinion, in terms of who's going to win this football game. John, for me, in terms of the Bills winning this game, I've got 3 major keys to victory. And I'm not sure any one's more important than the other, but the first thing that I have written down is you better have the right plan for Nico Collins. This wide receiver is unbelievable. 100 more yards than any other player in the NFL this season, and he is a problem. Big, fast, physical, ball skills, body control, hands, wins at all levels of the field. He's a problem. I mean, and what's amazing about Nico Collins and watching Houston is for how much of a problem he is, but also how wide open he is. Everybody knows that they want to throw him the ball. People just can't slow this guy down because he's such a bully at the top of routes, and he's just a tremendous physical specimen. And I think the Bills are going to have their hands full with him, and I think he's the key cog in the wheel. I know there's other good players on that team, but I think it's about Nico Collins. And I think the Bills have good corners to match up. I think Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford are quality starters that I think they're big physical corners as well. So I think there's some good on good, but man, Nico Collins has been a problem. And with his ability to win on those in-breakers, that's going to put stress on the Bills and kind of how they like to space the field and, maybe attack the safeties where I think the Bills have, a little bit deficient with in terms of their starting caliber players on the back end there. So Nico Collins and having the right plan there, I think is critical. Number 2, we'll keep it on the defensive side of the ball. I think it's a big day for the Bills' interior defensive line, and I'm specifically talking about the guy that's loyal to the soil, Ed Oliver, right? The Houston guy, 5-star recruit, could have went anywhere he wanted. He wanted to stay in Houston. And every time that he's been back to the state of Texas to play a football game, he's had a little something extra about him. I'm sure this will be a big opportunity for him. And I think, as you've articulated to this point, some concerns with the interior of that Houston Texans offensive line. Yeah, you mentioned Juice Scruggs, and I mean, even Kenyon Green, who I think has really been a problem at left guard this year. I think there should be some good matchups for Ed Oliver to be able to take advantage of in a year where Ed was tremendous last year. 9.5 sacks, big breakout season, quiet start to this year. I think that's got to change on Sunday afternoon against the Houston Texans. And the last thing for me is being two-dimensional on offense. I think that the Bills' offense is equipped to be able to throw it. It's equipped to be able to run it. And I think they need to present both of those things to Houston with a lot of consistency. I think you should be able to find some success running the ball against Houston. And if that's the case, that obviously sets up a lot for your passing game, softens up some of your looks in terms of coverage spacing. It really helps get the play action game going. And the Bills need to lean into that. And I think the world of Derek Stingley is one of the corners, but I think Kamari Lassiter is a young player. He's been vulnerable in terms of vertical separation. Yes. They got a young safety. Even if they get some of their other players back, Ward and those others, they're still working back, and I don't think they've been that good so far to start this season. So I think you've got to be two-dimensional on offense and really showcase the balance that you can bring to the table against the Houston Texans defense that has a lot of new players, and as you've already said, kind of still trying to figure it out.
I also want to add this for the Houston Texans. No Von Miller for this game. So that is a godsend for those two tackles who hasn't had what Titus Howard hasn't had the best start to this year. Laramie Tunsil has been good in terms of being able to protect the quarterback. The penalties have been an issue. So, we could talk about offense and defense, but they cannot start behind the sticks. That's probably number one. And D'Amico has been completely pissed about that. So controlling and maintaining penalties. They have been the most penalized team through 4 weeks, That has to change. But defensively, I saw the Buffalo Bills offensive line just have issues a little bit with the Baltimore Ravens. And they were able to get, 3 sacks on Josh Allen. So when you have a player like Josh Allen that can extend plays and at times trusts his arm more than maybe he should, right? Amazing arm talent. If you can get into his face and create that pressure, I think that gives any team a better chance to beat the Buffalo Bills. You cannot stay clean, of course. You never want that for Josh Allen offense. So getting into his face, forcing him out the pocket at times to create some of those errant throws, and being able to limit the penalties. If you do that, I think Houston has an opportunity to win this game and getting the ball out quicker. Finding that rhythm to allow this offense to be able to, for one, extend drives, create drives, that rhythm, open up the playbook. And to do that, I think a lot of 3-step drop options to maybe 1st and 10 to 2nd and 4. But to run with that, especially if you can't run the ball, utilize those tight ends to allow the offense to have positive plays.
Yeah, I think pressure on Josh Allen and any quarterback is a good recipe to winning a football game. I will say, to add some important context to that Baltimore game, I thought the pressure in that game was far more game script related than anything. That game got away from Buffalo pretty quick. And as you know, I mean, when you can play defense with a 2-score lead, which Baltimore had for 75% of the game, you could really tee off and stress protection schemes. Going into that game, Josh Allen was the least sacked quarterback in the NFL. I think he was the least sacked quarterback in the NFL last season as well. So Josh Allen doesn't typically get sacked, but when you're up 2-3 scores on an opponent, you don't have to respect the run game. You can tee off and really get creative with your pressure packages. And I thought that was a big part of Baltimore's recipe on Sunday night. Certainly something that I'm sure Houston and other teams would try to replicate moving forward. So we'll find out. We'll play it, see what happens, John. It's going to be a big one. I'm sure that it'll be one of the marquee games across the NFL this week. Surprising that they snuck it in at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. I thought maybe this would be a primetime game.
Especially considering the storylines around
it. Plenty of storylines.
That game's going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to that one, especially with the Josh Allen versus CJ Stroud matchup. For more on Joe, more on John, check them out over at Locked On Bills and Locked On Texans, respectively. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A big AFC North matchup in Cincinnati is on the horizon. The 1 p.m. slate, the Baltimore Ravens beat down on those Buffalo Bills, but the Cincinnati Bengals picked up their first win of the season against the Carolina Panthers in week 4. So the Ravens at 2-2, the Bengals at 1-3, and me being the host of Locked On Ravens, I will be taking it through Ravens big storylines, and Jake Lisco and James Rapine of Locked On Bengals will be taking it through the Bengals storylines as we get ready for a big matchup.
Let's talk keys to victory in this game. This is Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network. Crossover Thursday presented by PrizePicks, where you can download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Kevin, from the Ravens' perspective, what are the 3 things that need to go right for the Ravens to come out on top on Sunday?
I think first of all, this team has to be able to establish their ground game early like they did against the Bills. Obviously, I'm not expecting an 87-yard touchdown again. I think that that Ravens fans are a little spoiled with that one, but I think that if they can get Derrick Henry going early, pick up some early first downs with that, and get Cincinnati to either bring more guys into the box or just be more wary of that, like we've talked about over the course of this show, that's going to be huge in terms of keeping that in the back of Cincinnati's defense's mind for the entirety of the game. And so this team, they've been working through a bunch of different offensive line combinations. They lost 3 starters, and obviously we've talked about Cincinnati on the defensive front. What is that going to look like on Sunday? If Baltimore can out-physical Cincinnati on the ground, especially pushing them off of their spots, getting to the second level, that run game is going to, because that starts everything for this Ravens team. So the run game is going to be the first thing that I'm looking for the Ravens in this one. Second of all, it is shutting down Jamar Chase. Obviously, Marlon Humphrey did not play in both of the Cincinnati games last year, and Brandon Stevens did a pretty fine job on Jamar in both of those games. And with Marlon back, Marlon's playing at a really high level right now, but they like to use him in the slot. What they've been doing is they've been putting Marlon in the slot, using Brandon Stevens and Nate Wiggins, their rookie, on the outside. Now, there's a possibility that Arthur Millette, their starting slot corner, is going to be able to come back this week. He returned to practice after spending the first 4 weeks on IR. So I'm very curious to see how the Ravens end up defending Cincinnati. But they have, as we talked about, a lot of other guys not named Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, if you want to throw him into the conversation, that they're going to have to worry about here. But Baltimore's defense has been very suffocating for the most part. It's been that pass defense that has been a little bit suspect over the course of the first 4 weeks. So maybe not last week against Buffalo, but the other three. And then finally, I'm going to say control the clock and establish yourself so that you have a lead late in this game. Not that Baltimore can't play from behind, but at the end of the day, we know that this team, if they have, say, a 14-point lead, 17-point lead, the book is somewhat out on the Ravens. I think that's kind of the strategy for some teams is, hey, let's give them a big lead and see if they can hold on to it towards the end, because they have not been great about, blowing those leads. It's been difficult over the past 5 years or so for this team. But more often than not, you would at least hope, especially after what we saw in week 4 against Buffalo, that they can just ground and pound, keep your foot on the gas. That's something that the Ravens have been echoing really this entire past week. Didn't do it against Dallas, didn't do it against Las Vegas. They made sure to do it against Buffalo. So that's their new identity, is even if they're up by 17, they're not going to slow down. You have to keep that identity if you want to beat a team like Cincinnati, because they can put up points in a hurry. I know all the concerns kind of on what the defense is right now in Cincinnati. The offense, they're no slouches. We know what they can do.
Yeah, I think a lot of that makes sense. But what's interesting to me about the Ravens is the Bengals, and I'm at Paycor Stadium right now recording, like, you could say play with a lead, but if you're the Ravens, part of your explosion is running the ball. So I don't know if you're ever going to get the Ravens out of it. Like, Kevin, is there a scenario where they abandon that? They should never abandon the run. I know you mentioned play action, but I would always run Derrick Henry. Like, if you're down 10 in the fourth quarter, I'm still giving Derrick Henry touches, because that might be the 80-yard game that you want or you need.
It's so funny, because there's a very fine line between being too conservative and then not being conservative enough. And obviously when you're down, you just have to abandon all that. You're just like, all right, we have to get down the field. So if the Ravens are down, like you said, James, let's say 10 points and there are 9 minutes to go left in the game, you still give Derrick Henry touches, right? I think, maybe first down run, second down run. The thing that they can't do is you can't throw an incompletion on first down, be in 2nd and 10, then hand the ball off and then get like 2 yards, you're in 3rd and long. Even 2nd and long situations kill you at that point. So you have to be able to run it effectively, but when you're down, you don't abandon Derrick Henry. The other thing that you can do is be a factor in the screen game. So I'm really curious. I mean, the Ravens have been terrible at screens. You can go back however many years you want to. It's been pretty bad. But they've actually been a very effective screen team this year, part of which is because Derrick Henry has come in here and done a really good job of that. So I'm not abandoning the run, but once you get down to that nitty-gritty fourth quarter, you're down by 2 scores, you have to do quick throws, make sure you pick up chunk yards, because teams are going to make you pay if you can't get chunk yards and that clock is still running.
Let's talk Bengals keys. I have nothing else to add there. I agree that Kevin's analysis is pretty spot on. And their keys go hand in hand, right, James? We're going to talk about the Bengals defensive line here. We're going to talk about controlling the game. We're going to talk about the Bengals defense in general, the offense's ability to keep up against a higher level of competition. Do you see it the same way, James? Are those the areas you're looking at, or where do you differ when you're thinking about the 3 top keys for the Bengals?
Score 35 or more.
Yeah, that's
it. Tell me if do you have 35 or not?
Maybe 42.
They haven't done it this year. Yeah, right. And I was going to say 40. I feel like it's just almost unreasonable in this day and age to say that. So 35 is the mark. So key number 1, score 35. Key number 2, get off to a fast start. I do think that matters. I'll say why in a second. And it isn't because the Ravens are going to abandon their bread and butter. And then number 3, it's win the turnover battle handily. And I think all 3 go hand in hand. And here's why. If the Bengals get off to a hot start on offense and end up scoring 35 plus, Lamar and the Ravens, they might be able to keep up and stay with their ground game, but they're going to pass a little bit more. They're going to try this defense a little bit more. And the less you have to deal with Derrick Henry running between the tackles, the less you have to deal with Lamar Jackson in that ground game, I think the better. I think that this secondary, if there is an area where you would be like, okay, well, they have a shot here, it would be the secondary. It would being able to contain this passing game for the Ravens. And so maybe that does lead to turnovers. That does lead to the Ravens fumbling as they're driving downfield for the game tying score, and it forces them to press a little bit. I think it all goes hand in hand there. And to me, defensively, it's unrealistic, even though I spent a lot of time talking about the health of these guys, to expect BJ Hill, who's going to be back, Trey Hendricks, expect these guys to stop Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. So if you're playing from ahead and you're winning the turnover battle, you give Joe Burrow a few more touches, then could he put up 35 plus? I think it's realistic, and he has done it against the Ravens. He scored, led the Bengals to a 41-17 win over Lamar and the Ravens at M&T Bank in 2021. So they need something similar to that. That's the Jamar Chase spin move game.
Yeah, it's a tall task, let's say, for this Bengals defense right now. I think that it's kind of cliche to call it a key, but these big momentum swings, the turnovers, points off turnovers, if that kind of happens early in this game, teams steal possessions here or there, I think that's significant. Teams have been very willing to go for it against this Bengals defense early in the season too. I would expect the Ravens would be in the same situation if they get into 4th and shorts near midfield. And so if they can get a 4th down stop for once, count that as a turnover, those sorts of plays I think are pretty significant for the Bengals as well. But I think that the thing for me is keep the offense going, because I don't have that confidence in the defense right now, right? You got to find something to help with Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson needs to play at more of a level that he did in week 2 against the Chiefs, and we've seen from him the last couple of weeks, and coming off an injury. And he practiced, as you mentioned, James, on Wednesday, but that's a lot to ask of Trey right now. So it does feel like a challenging game for the Bengals, but it is at home, the first of these 2 matchups between these teams, and hopefully the home field advantage plays to the Bengals' favor if you're rooting for the Bengals in this one. Kevin, any closing thoughts from the Ravens' perspective?
I think that the big thing has really been the evolution of Zach Orr over these first 4 weeks, where I know we talked about it all over the past couple of years, guys, that Joe Burrow and this Bengals offense could not figure out Mike Macdonald. And that was something where it's like, can you finally get over that Mike Macdonald hump? Mike Macdonald's gone, and Zach Orr's a first-time play caller. And we have seen that he's not necessarily a super aggressive blitzer, at least not as much as McDonald was, and nowhere near Don Martindale. That's a whole different stratosphere. But I think what we've seen is he's being able to adapt his personnel better. And over the course of these first 4 weeks, we have seen him come in with an identity, and these players are playing for him. And it's been a group effort there are a lot of questions about this group of could they bounce back? They were a historic defense last year. I don't think anybody was expecting that again this season, but especially in the run game, they haven't fallen off there. In the passing game, they're improving. So it's just a matter of being able to, you're not going to stop, I'd say, the Cincinnati offense, but can you do enough to slow them down to where you can play your game? And I agree with you guys too. Fast start. I mean, for either of these teams, whichever team gets off to a fast start could be the team that establishes momentum. But regardless, these AFC North matchups, we know they can get kind of weird at times. So I'm not ruling out any tomfoolery in this one either. The Ravens have had the Bengals number over recent years, but the Bengals will be doing everything in their power to not fall to 1-4. That'd be a tough hole to fall into early in the season. For more on the Ravens, check me out over on Locked On Ravens. And for more Bengals, check Jake and James out over on Locked On Bengals, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be wrapping up the 1 p.m. slate of games. 4 more good matchups to look forward to. Stay tuned. We have lots to talk about still on the Ultimate NFL Pregame Show. First, the show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long. on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going to go off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on PrizePicks. So for the Ravens and Bengals game, 1 p.m., maybe want to go for the more on Derrick Henry rushing yards, maybe more on Jamar Chase receiving yards. A lot of great options over on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Continuing on here on the Locked On NFL pregame show, Kevin Oestreicher still with you, breaking down all of the Week 5 action. Again, should be another jam-packed week of great action across the NFL. And we'll wrap up the last of the 1 p.m. games in this second part of the show. Starting off, the Washington Commanders are just taking the league by storm, particularly stud rookie quarterback Jaden Daniels, who has been incredible this season. They're going to be taking on the Cleveland Browns, and we have a lot to dive into with big storylines, key matchups, and more. So Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns, David Harrison of Locked On Commanders take you through what you need to know leading up to game time.
Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Browns crossover Thursday here, brought to you by PrizePicks. And Jeff, there is a chance for the Cleveland Browns to overcome this massive 3-point spread that they have got ahead of them. What 3 things must they do in order to become the underdog winner on Sunday?
Well, first things first, one of the advantages they've had to this point is they seem to be playing a little bit better on the road than they are at home. Certainly less pressure, when you're not trying to satisfy all 70,000 of your fan base. But it's because things are not going well. It sounds silly, but it's simplicity, really. This team has yet to throw for 200 yards. So there's been 2 games where Washington's given up over 300 yards, or there's been 2 games where Washington has given up less than 200 yards. You want to be closer to that 300 number, but I will take north of 200. They have not done it yet. It's going to help the defense tremendously. They're not running the ball consistently, and there's a million factors. Obviously, Nick Chubb's not being there is one of them. The fact that every week we go into this, and up until about Friday, we don't even know who the starting offensive line is going to be. Sometimes it's even Sunday. So when you're talking about a new system with a new offensive coordinator, a new offensive line coach, revolving doors at who's playing what position. Joe Bitonio's played left guard and he's played left tackle. Ethan Posick has been injured. He's played center and he's played left guard. You've had guys that have played left tackle and right tackle. Wyatt Teller is out. Zach Zinter is currently your starting right guard. So it's really hard in a new system with a new offensive line coach to get any cohesion going. And yeah, in those scenarios, it's probably easier to pass block than it is to make your run game work, because run game, it's just got to be consistency. The more reps you get, the better it comes. And it's just kind of really been an issue to this point. You look at a couple of games, the numbers might be skewed. Oh, well, they ran for X amount, yards per carry. Well, no, against Jacksonville, Jerome Ford had a really long run, saved that number, made it look better than it did. Last week against Las Vegas, had another big run that made those numbers look better than they actually were. You've got to run the ball, get over 100 yards. And most of this is done because you got to get the defense off the field. And this has been a problem even last year when the Browns defense was really good. The longer they played, the weaker they got. Obviously makes a lot of sense. The other thing is, though, the last 2 games, Cleveland Browns have had over 10 missed tackles against the New York Giants and 10 missed tackles against Las Vegas Raiders. You want to look simply as to why you did not win either of those games. That comes down to it. Obviously, one game was I think it was a 5-point loss. Last week was a 4-point loss. It's simple. I mean, and these are things that make differences. They extend drives. All of a sudden, a 3 and out, is it a 7-play drive, or what would have been a 5-play, 6-play drive is now all of a sudden double digits. And then your defense is getting taxed, and now it's more pressure on the offense. So, it's just simple things. And these are things that this team has not done to this point. They need a collective effort. They got plenty of collective efforts last year, but there hasn't been a game yet where you could say, all right, this was good, this was good, this was good. You always seem that, when you get to it, and certainly get to it the second time of the All-22, you just seem like you're trying to find more out of this team. And it's kind of frustrating because the expectations for this team was sky high. We got some talk over the summer that, hey, maybe it's not looking so great, but everybody tried to justify it. Well, Amari Cooper's kind of sitting in, not everybody's practicing. Your top 3 offensive tackles aren't doing much, but you want to know what? maybe it did mean something. And because this team is kind of slow coming out the gate, and if they can't get it right this week, the question is going to be, now all of a sudden you're scrambling really hard, went over about a 12-game pace over the last 13 weeks. And look, the AFC may be close. It may, may be a lot of parity, but eventually teams are going to start separating themselves, and the Browns need to get closer to this pack, like as quickly as they possibly can. Or, you're asking for, a very, very high win to loss, to close out the season to have a chance to get to the playoffs.
Jeff and David are great. For more on Jeff, more on David, check them out. Locked On Browns, Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Moving on, the Jacksonville Jaguars are spiraling right now, do not have a win on the season, and reports of Doug Peterson losing that locker room might be a little more real than people anticipating. For the Indianapolis Colts, they got a win against the Pittsburgh Steelers, led by Joe Flacco after Anthony Richardson had to leave that game early. Jake Arthur of Locked On Colts and Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars highlight key players, big matchups, and more ahead of that big game.
Final segment of today's episode, which is the Thursday crossover Thursday here, sponsored by PrizePicks. Make sure you download the app and use the code Locked On NFL, all one word, LOCKEDON NFL, to win $50 instantly when you play. That is PrizePicks. Sponsors all of our crossovers here on Thursday across the Locked On Podcast Network, and make sure you check them out. Well, I don't know. I think I have to let you know that it's a pretty special day. They're going to put Tom Coughlin, the greatest coach and GM we've ever had, in the Ring of Honor. They're going to wear those old uniforms that they wore back when Tom Coughlin was the coach. The place is going to be fired up. I think it might be raining a little bit. So I think the Jaguars are going to pull this out, man. And I'm not being a homer, because if you listen to Locked On Jaguars, anybody can tell you I have been beating up on this team. I've called for people to get fired. But sometimes in the NFL, what happens is these formula games where they gut it out and they muster up a win. I'm going to even pick a score for you, man. I'm going to wait till you tell me what you think is going to happen before I pick that score, though, Jake.
All right. Yeah. So I don't know if it's as big a deal there in Jacksonville as it is with the Colts, but the Colts have not won there since 2014. It's a thing. We call it a curse around here. And, this feels like one of those games where the Colts probably don't they probably don't have much business winning it, but they still pull it out. We don't know what's going on at quarterback. Probably not going to have your running back. Your defense is just beat to smithereens right now. I don't know. This feels like one where there's going to be a lot of ugly moments on both sides, probably, which will lead me to my keys in a moment. But I just got to think, if the Colts aren't going to win in Jacksonville, right now against an 0-4 team, when are they ever going to win in Jacksonville? So I'll give it. It's going to be a one-score game, but I'm going to give the Colts the 24-17 win in this one.
All right, all of that makes sense. And I forgot about the curse. And the worst team I ever saw fielded, here was the year Urban Meyer was a coach, at least until this season. Oh. This team is talented. That team is just bad, right?
Yeah.
You guys are supposed to make the playoffs, and you couldn't because you lost to that horrible, horrible team.
There were people in the stands wearing clown masks. They didn't even want their team to win.
I didn't want it. They knew they were going to get the first round pick, but no, they didn't want to win. And then I believe that y'all lost another one, the Gardner Minshew once down here. So
19-20.
Yeah, man, it's just been buck wild down here for the Colts. I'm going to go 16-13 Jaguars. And the only reason I'll do that is because I think it's going to be an ugly game. I think the weather's going to be ugly. We do have a very good field goal kicker, though. Young kid by the name of Cam Little that can hit it from 55 yards. They haven't been able to punch it in. I'm going to say the Jaguars get a couple of key turnovers in this game, all right? And that they don't commit any turnovers. But that's the only way that they win. If the Jaguars commit multiple turnovers, they will be 0-5 because they have just not been able to overcome turning the ball over, especially in the wrong on the wrong side of the field. They just have not been able to overcome that. But I think they're going to gut this out and find a way to win, and it'll be good for Monday morning at the water cooler, but I don't think anybody's going to look at this game and say, okay, they turned it around. No, I don't think that's going to happen at all, but I think it'll give a reprieve to the coaching staff for at least 1 week. And then the key is going to be after that, okay, now can this jumpstart them? Can this get them going? And can they squeeze out another couple of wins and find themselves 3-4 in a couple of weeks? Or if they're 0-5, it's time to kiss the baby, man. And I think you're going to start seeing people talk about them getting out of here.
Yeah, so I think in this one for the Colts, same thing. They got to take care of the ball, whether it's Anthony or Joe Flacco. Both of them have a tendency to just grip it and rip it. You know, when Joe won Comeback Player of the Year last year for Cleveland, he was still, I don't want to say playing reckless, but like he was willing to take chances, and you know he turned the ball over a little bit. And we obviously know Anthony has the 6 interceptions, but again, I think. Whether it's Anthony or Joe, I think Jacksonville is obviously going to want to try and make them pass it, even though that hasn't been their forte, stopping the pass. So the Colts are going to probably have to pass a little more. You just can't be reckless with it. Take care of the ball. I mean, Jacksonville, I believe they've only got 1 takeaway so far, right? So, like, if you're turning it over against a team that doesn't take the ball away, it's like, God, you're really shooting yourself in the foot there. Get a couple big plays in the passing game. You know, this is a defensive coordinator that put the Colts through hell last year when it was Colts in Atlanta. Now, Michael Pittman was not in that game, and Gardner Minshew was the quarterback. So, like, it's just a perfect recipe for disaster there. But, you know, the Colts got some guys that can win those one-on-one press man matchups. You know, Alec Pierce has been outstanding through the first few weeks. A.D. Mitchell, if he can form any sort of chemistry with his quarterbacks, he's cooking DBs one-on-one. It would be a great week to maybe get him jump started because he is legitimately open a lot when he's out there. His playing time is just dwindling because he's kind of having some rookie errors. But then I think, you know, the Colts defensively, they've had to deal with Trevor Lawrence getting the ball out immediately and not being able to lay a hand on him. That's been the recipe a couple times. They have not been able to pressure him because he's getting rid of it so quickly. So whether or not they do that, they've got to harass him. It's really tough because that defensive line is so banged up, but they were still able to make life difficult for Justin Fields often last week. But if it's a quick passing attack, you know, swarm to the ball immediately and just try and harass Lawrence the best you can. Week 1 against Houston, the Colts defensive philosophy was, you know, just stop the run as a byproduct of getting to CJ Stroud. I don't know if, you know, they got to play that level of harassment towards where the ball is going. Right. But I am worried about Jacksonville being able to run on them, especially a guy like Bigsby who can break those tackles. The Colts linebackers have stepped it up in the last couple weeks, but we've seen some atrocious tackling early in the season. And again, I mentioned, you know, near the top, like at a certain point, how long can you overcome your injuries?
Right. And the Jaguars have those interesting injuries in the secondary. So what's going to be the cat and mouse here and the chess match here is, do you try them with those big, tall receivers? Do you get after them, and do you test their depth in their secondary? And then for Jacksonville, I think they need to run the ball. But one thing is if they go to not plays, but more of players over plays, Brian Thomas Jr. has looked the part. And Mitchell and Brian Thomas was a source of a lot of arguing and fussing between me and a bunch of people in the pre-draft contest. And now I don't think they trade Brian Thomas Jr. for Marvin Harrison Jr. with the way that they have fallen in love with him and how he's played. So he has been a pleasant surprise for Jacksonville. I just hope that they understand that they have to run the ball first and then set that up with a little bit of play action to be able to take those shots down the field. But if they come in with the with this disposition, like this predetermined disposition that they're just going to throw it, and then not try to win the game, I think it'd be a disaster for Jacksonville. So I got 16-13, and you got, what do you got, 24 to what, 17?
24-17. And I'm glad we got to the point where we can mention Brian Thomas Jr. because that is another one that scares me. And that is a guy who we thought almost was a foregone conclusion to the Colts. We all kind of thought he would be a Colt, but Latu kind of fell into their laps. But no, I don't know that the Colts have anyone healthy right now that really matches up well with him. So this might be a good day for Brian Thomas Jr., another good day.
Jake and Tony give you all the insight you need on the Colts and the Jaguars. So check them out over at Locked On Colts and Locked On Jaguars, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, let's talk about Caleb Williams. Picks up his first career NFL win in week 4, looking to build on that against the Carolina Panthers, who, with Andy Dalton under center, even though they lost to Cincinnati in week 4, have shown new life, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So Julian Council of Locked On Panthers, Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears dive into if Caleb can pick up his second win of the year or if the Panthers can spoil it.
All right, thanks for tuning in to our crossover Thursday Locked On Bears, Locked On Panthers podcast. I'm Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears alongside Julian Council from Locked On Panthers. And our crossover Thursday podcast is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use our code Locked On NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Julian, what do you see as some of the keys here for the Panthers? What do they need to do around Eddie Dalton? What do they need to do defensively? How can they get a win over the Chicago Bears?
Yeah, looking at the defense first, Lauren, we brought up earlier in the show that Shaq Thompson out for the rest of the season for Carolina. Josie Jewell not expected to play on Sunday with that groin and hamstring injury. So that means Trevin Wallace, rookie, you're up. Claude Charles, you're also up as the 2 starters at that interior linebacker spot. The Panthers currently have 111 career snaps among their linebackers. 4 guys, 111 career snaps, not starts, snaps. That is concerning when you're just looking at the overall depth and experience, and we'll see. They drafted Trevin Wallace in the 3rd round out of Kentucky for a reason. Hopefully, for the Panthers' sake, they're going to see that reason on Sunday as he steps into that role that they're expecting he's going to hold for the next 4+ years. And Clyde Charles, been more of someone that they've seen as a special teams guy, really stepped up in the preseason as an interior linebacker with that second team unit. So we'll see what they're able to do, but they're really going to need those linebackers to not have a significant drop off from the 2 vets in Thompson and Josie Jewell. The second thing I'm looking at, they got to find a way to put pressure on the rookie Caleb Williams. The Bears have given up 16 sacks. It's tied 3rd most in the NFL. 10.2 sack percentage allowed, which is 28th in the league. The Panthers, though, they're not great at getting after the passer. You look at this outside linebacker group of pass rushers outside of Jadeveon Clowney, you don't know who any of these guys are. I saw someone write earlier this week, it's a who's who of whom. And that's the problem when you don't have someone like DJ Woonem, who was within the division a year ago there in the NFC North playing for Minnesota. He's still on the PUP list, recovering from a partially torn quad, also maybe some other health issues there that's keeping him out right now as he's going to miss his 5th straight game to start off this season. They got to find some pressure on the quarterback this week, especially against a rookie who loves to do things out of structure, but can be prone to make a couple of mistakes. And we've seen that early on in his rookie career. It's going to happen. I think Williams is going to be a good player down the road, but it's still early on. And I think Ejiro Rivera is a DC that can get after him. So they got to be able to find somebody to get some pressure. And that's just the thing you want to do each and every single week, but only 5 sacks, league worst 12.8 pressure percentage. Not great. And then number 3, like Chuba Hubbard has been outstanding on the ground the last couple of weeks. The Bears defense is phenomenal, especially in the secondary, but I think they can be had a little bit in the run game. The Panthers have been solid up front so far. Back-to-back 100-yard rushing games with Chuba Hubbard. That's really where they want to lead off with their offense, be able to take pressure off Andy Dalton against a strong secondary, run the ball. He's 3rd right now in the NFL in success rate. Chuba Hubbard is at 65.5, right behind Chase Brown of the Bengals and Lamar Jackson of the Ravens. Give him the ball, feed him, and that's a way to have success and win a game this Sunday in Chicago.
I will say that it'll be an interesting matchup there of like trying to get this Panthers defensive line going, both in the pass rushing game, but also keeping your linebackers free on the back end so they don't have as much to wash through in the running game against the Bears offensive line that has been really the Achilles heel of the offense so far, particularly on the interior, where your left guard, Tevin Jenkins, we kind of thought would be your best lineman this year. And not only has he been struggling a lot more than we expected, but he's also injured now, dealing with a rib injury. The Bears seem to have some optimism that he could be able to go this week. They're calling it a day-to-day thing, so they'll kind of see. But even if he does go, he's not going to be at 100%. He's going to be dealing with some pain there, and he wasn't playing phenomenally before he had the injury. And then there's their new center, Coleman Shelton, who they signed from the Rams this offseason, has been pretty disappointing and probably the weakest link up front. And they've been rotating right guards next to them. So that whole interior has been messy. So I think you can trust the Bears tackles a little bit more against somebody like Clowney or Charles Harris on the other side. But I'm looking at somebody like, A'Shawn Robinson in the interior, or if Shai Tuttle plays up the nose. Like, I think those are going to be the guys that can make the biggest difference, because that's where the Bears are weaker up front, and also where the Bears are going to want to run the ball up front, right up that middle in the core towards those linebackers. But if the Panthers can win those matchups, I think that's an area where, you can find some advantages.
Yeah, and those are the matchups they won a couple weeks ago when they beat the Raiders on the road, as they got injuries there in the interior defensive line, where Derek Brown, their best defensive player, maybe their best player overall, he's out for the rest of the season with the meniscus tear. Then Shai Tuttle, honestly, has been terrible when he's played here in Carolina, dating back to last season in the first 2 games. They haven't really missed him that much the last 2 weeks. Jaden Peavy has actually stepped up in that role, and he's been a much better player for Carolina than Tuttle has ever been in his tenure here in Charlotte. And A'Shaun Robinson is actually, all things considered, as bad as they've been up front on the defensive line, has actually been a pretty solid signing for them. He's been an upgrade over the guy, Deshaun Williams, who they had last year. Coincidentally, Deshaun Williams, who did not make the Bills team, is now back on the Panthers practice squad, has been elevated the last 2 weeks, and I expect that will likely be the case again. So we'll see, like guys like Nick Thurman, LeBron Reagan have to step up, be able to win those battles on the inside. But yeah, it's definitely going to be A'Shaun Robinson and Jaden Peavy are the 2 guys you're looking at. And if Tuttle's available and healthy with that foot injury, which has caused him the last 2 weeks to miss out on, he'll start, even though I don't know how much that's going to really help Carolina as far as their want to win this game on Sunday. But what about for the Bears as far as the 3 things they got to try to do in order to win this game on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely ties right back in, right, to the same thing. The interior of this Bears offensive line has to keep making progress. It felt like a step forward last week in the running game. And I give some credit to the offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, who came under a lot of fire, but mixed up the run concepts a lot in the ground. They went to some more gap scheme runs, power and counter, or just duo right at the middle down your throat. And I think it let the interior in particular not have to be so athletic, moving side to side, but just like, okay, I'm just going to hit the guy in front of me and try and move him with a little bit more power than finesse here. And I think they were able to lean into that a little bit more. So they need to be able to lean into that again and say, no matter what your combination of the 3 in the middle is, which at this point could be any combination of the 3 there, being able to kind of lean forward and get some north-south movement on this offensive line in the running game is going to be so critical, because they want Caleb Williams to just have to be a game manager and to not have to escape the pocket and make miraculous throws outside of structure, right? Like, it's great when he can do that, but you don't want that to be your plan A. You want that to be the plan B or plan C, and not call on that every other passing play because it's the only way you can generate some offense. So they want a boring looking offense where they just run the ball, check it down to the running back, to the tight end, let them make some plays after the catch. And then in theory, mix in some deep shots downfield. And that's kind of the other second key here, is that Caleb Williams has taken pretty good care of the football underneath. It's the deep shots where the accuracy is just not yet dialed in. It's getting on the same page as DJ Moore, as Rome Odunze, as Keenan Allen. They'll get guys open, but he'll overthrow it a little bit, or put it a little bit too far in front, or he thinks he's going to bend the route in, but he takes the route vertical, and they're not on the same page there. We're still waiting for the Bears to really unlock that aspect of their offense. They've hit like maybe 1 or 2 over the course of the year, but like a little bit more of that. So it's not purely just check down Charlie, but it's the deep shots to open things up vertically, and then you'll create more space underneath for the check downs, and vice versa. Stretch them out horizontally and vertically on offense. And then defensively, the last thing for the Bears here, they just need to keep things in front of them and wait for the Panthers to make a mistake, right? Like, Andy Dalton is a good quarterback, and he's going to be smart with the football, but he's going to give you an opportunity once or twice in the game, and you just have to be able to capitalize that. Don't make it easy on them. Don't give them up the big play. Let them catch it underneath and just make the tackle soundly, and make them go 12 plays to get down the field on you every single drive. Most NFL offenses can't do 12 play drives over and over and over again without a drop, a fumble, an interception, a sack, something along the way, a penalty that derails a drive. So the Bears can kind of just be patient with it and understand that Dalton's going to move the ball a bit between the 20s, but they'll hold firm in the red zone. A turnover or 2 will go a long way towards giving Caleb Williams in this offense another shot with the ball, another score on the board, and then perhaps another Chicago Bears victory. One last thing I want to ask you about, Julian, before we wrapped up. Panthers ran a punt last week. Could we expect any special teams shenanigans in this game?
I don't know. Depends on what time score is. I think last week it made a lot of sense, considering that they got off to a slow start. They were down 2 scores. Why not try to make something happen in that situation? And they had it until they didn't. It was a great defensive play there by the Bengals. I don't think any trickeration as far as that goes, unless it's absolutely necessary. But I'm very curious to see how this game goes. I know the Bears are still trying to figure out who they are offensively. 5th career start of Caleb Williams, and you've obviously seen Andy Dalton there in Chicago, and we watched him go to Dallas when he had to start, when Dak got hurt. We saw him a couple years ago with the Saints when Jameis went down. And this feels like through 2 weeks, this is the best I've seen Andy Dalton look in a long time. So I'm very curious to see if he does indeed put the ball in harm's way, because he's really not done that the first 2 weeks. Last week, it was Trey Hendrickson being able to beat the left tackle, Ike Ekwonu, and be able to knock the ball as Andy Dalton was throwing it. That was really the only kind of issue, like turnover. That's the only turnover he's had so far, but that's the only time he's really put the ball in harm's way. So I'm very curious to see, because I feel like the Panthers, with Dalton, they've been able to move the ball down the field. And the Bears do have an excellent secondary. It'll be interesting to see how many points it's going to take to win this game, especially with a Panthers defense that's struggling and a Bears offense that's still trying to figure out who they are. So I don't think it's going to be a rock fight, but it's going to be an interesting game on Sunday for sure that I think can go either way.
Yeah, I'm with you there. That's why the spread is only 3.5 points at FanDuel Sportsbook there. Last thing I'll leave you with, to give you a sense of where this Bears offense has been this season. This week, the Bears official team social media account put out a highlight video of their punter, Torrey Taylor, who's been great this season. But when you're putting out the punter highlight tape, that's not necessarily a sign of a great offense. But
I love that, though, because honestly, that's what Iowa football was doing a couple years ago, as he was literally their best player. So it's good to see that some things stay the same.
I'm excited to see Caleb Williams grow. And of course, there are going to be rookie growing pains, but getting a win is always important, especially that first one, to kind of get that off of your back. But for more on Julian, more on Lauren, check him out over at Locked On Panthers and Locked On Bears, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. One more 1 o'clock game to get into. The Miami Dolphins are reeling right now. Poor quarterback play, losing guys to injury. It's tough over there in Miami, and the Patriots are trying to find their way as well. It's a younger team that wasn't necessarily expected to contend for Super Bowls anyway, but you have Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins and Mike DeBate of Locked On Patriots diving into what could be a better AFC East matchup than people think.
Patriots fans and Dolphins fans, as the late, great Gorilla Monsoon may say, the time for the talk is just about over. Your New England Patriots and your Miami Dolphins will hook it up at 1 p.m. this Sunday, October 6th, at Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts. Kyle, we've broken this one down from a Dolphins perspective, from a Patriots perspective, but if the Dolphins are to go in and pull the ever so slight upset right now, thanks to our friends over at FanDuel, what do they need to do to earn this victory?
Well, let me first go on the record and say I would not be in on any money line action for the Dolphins right now. The confidence is very low, but I think if Miami is going to win the game, I think you do need to find some elements of explosive plays. I don't think you can trust your team to work methodically down the field and take completions as they're available. And they have shown kind of an inconsistent ability to call runs. They've shown an inconsistent ability to call on runs that are working. They want to work the outside and the edges, but the inside is largely what teams have been giving them. And they've had some success taking it, but they don't take it with consistency. So you have Jalen Hill or Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill as two marquee wide receivers in the NFL. It has been next to impossible for you to get them the ball the last 2 weeks. I don't know how that's possible, where I watch teams that have one good wide receiver and are not good offenses still find ways to get that guy the ball 6 to 8 times a game. So that for me is the big thing. How do you change what you're trying to do in order to create explosives? That is one for me. Can you manufacture 3 to 5 explosive plays in this game? If the answer is yes, I think they have a good chance to actually win the game, because now you're not pinning the defense up in negative field position battles for 60 minutes. I think another thing for the Dolphins, and this one's offensively, and it's all in the coaching staff, I think they really need to get rid of some of the shift and motion elements of the pre-snap mechanics. The list of pre-snap penalties for the Dolphins would melt your mind over the first 4. It's more than a dozen pre-snap, procedural, illegal shift, illegal motion, illegal formation type of penalties. And that is with a quarterback who's been here now 3 weeks. It's just extra margin for error. They had one where they got up on the line of scrimmage and they had 4 guys moving at the same time. And one of them was a guy who was already in motion for the snap. So I think you got to get rid of some of that stuff. I think with the way the offense is working, it's not really beneficial in the way that it would theoretically be in the first place. And I don't know if Mike McDaniel has the capacity to do it based on his tone when he talks about his offense. And then I'll take the low-hanging fruit on defense, and I'll say you're going to have to get your offense into scoring position with a couple of turnovers and early turnovers in possessions, not wait till they get down into the red zone and then take a turnover, because I don't think the Dolphins would do anything with it if they got it anyway. So can you get turnovers that start the offense on the plus side of the 50 to give your at least special teams some opportunities for some extra points? That's, for me, what the script looks like for winning games. And it's unfortunately one of those scripts where some of it you're not really in control of. But that's what it feels like watching this team trying to play football right now.
Absolutely. And I think New England Patriots fans are listening to a lot of what you just said, and they're nodding their head, because a lot of those keys are exactly what the Patriots will need to do to Miami in order to try to win this game. Obviously, the first thing from a Patriots perspective, if they're going to earn the victory on Sunday in week 5, is to protect the football. Ramondre Stevenson is a very adept runner, and he's looked very good when running the football, but he hasn't looked good at all when it comes to protecting it. And that is a big problem. When you fumble the ball 4 times in as many games, and you're costing your team valuable field position, and you're giving them and you're taking away their ability to be able to sustain drives and maybe even get into the red zone, that's a problem. Head coach Gerard Mayo was very matter of fact when we asked him about this on Wednesday, when he said that benching Ramondre right now, which I think would have been unthinkable 4 weeks ago, is on the table, and giving the ball to Antonio Gibson and allowing him to be the lead runner, because the Patriots simply cannot allow any more unnecessary turnovers. So if they do that and protect the football, they need to get back to the basics that they had when they were playing well on offense, and that is using this run to facilitate everything they do on offense, including taking deep shots down the field off of play action. I think the Patriots need to get a little aggressive, maybe test that a little bit, test that secondary, that Dolphins secondary, and take some shots down the field. Of course, all of this is predicated on getting the protection Jacoby Brissett needs in order to make these throws and to hand the ball off. He hasn't had that because of a decimated offensive line, which is going to be at a disadvantage on Sunday without David Andrews and some of their key members. Another thing the Patriots have to do on the defensive side of the ball is they have to eliminate the home run pass. And we talked about this a little earlier, Kyle. If the Patriots are going to try to mitigate that lack of pass rush up front because of the injuries they've had, they have to use that secondary to be able to lock down some of Miami's speedy and very dangerous weapons. If they can do that and shut that off and yield a little bit of the middle part of the field, they have a chance to take away what Tyler Huntley does well. And last but certainly not least, as you said, if the Patriots are going to win this, they have to win the turnover battle. They have to force some turnovers, get Miami on its heels, force them into a couple of bad plays, and then they can go to work and do what they need to do and set up with short field position. Patriots are going to need to do all 3 of these to a T in order to earn the victory on Sunday. They can do it. Whether or not they will do it is still a matter of conjecture, because this team right now has not necessarily been what you see, what you get. It's a mystery and wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma in Foxborough, Kyle.
Yeah, and it's should be an entertaining game for sure. I don't know that it will be the cleanest game of the weekend. Might not be the most points you see this weekend, but a lot at stake for both of these teams as far as you're kind of creeping towards that record mark where you know what it means if you reach a record of 1-4 as compared to 2-3, and 1-3 is already a big enough hole for either one of these teams, regardless of what the preseason expectations were. So I'd expect the intensity of the game in that regard to be high, and hopefully that means an entertaining but healthy football game.
I don't expect too much from that game in terms of fireworks, but hey, you know what? Could be some level of a defensive battle that maybe even ends in something like 9-6 based off of how those two teams are playing. But for more on the Dolphins, more on the Patriots, check Kyle and Mike out over at Locked On Dolphins and Locked On Patriots, respectively, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. 1 p.m. matchups in the books coming up next here on the Ultimate NFL Pregame Show. We're going to be taking you through the 4 p.m. games, 4 of them to get to. Stay tuned. We have a ton to dive into here on the Ultimate NFL Pregame Show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You're going to start with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So for this Ravens and Bengals game coming up, Ravens open up as 2.5-point favorites going to Cincinnati. So if you like the Ravens as the favorites, the Bengals as the underdog, be sure to pick your side on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Week 5 in the NFL has plenty of incredible matchups across the board, and we're diving into all of them here on the Ultimate NFL Pregame Show. I am Kevin Ostreicher, and alongside our local experts on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, we are bringing you everything you need to know from the biggest storylines, key matchups, predictions, players to watch, and so much more to get you ready for game time. 1 p.m. matchups are huge, but the 4 p.m. matchups have plenty of spice to them as well in week 5. First, we'll go to Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Rams are still dealing with so many injuries, and the Green Bay Packers got Jordan Love back last week, and he almost led an incredible comeback for that Green Bay team against the Minnesota Vikings. So Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers and Travis Rogers of Locked On Rams have a lot to dive into, and they get you ready for game time.
Locked On Packers, Locked On Rams, a crossover Thursday. We finish up here. Travis Rogers, Locked On Rams. And Travis, score 30? Is that the plan? Like if you're the Rams, you feel like you got to score a bunch of points in this one.
Yeah, I mean, had we talked 2 weeks ago, Peter, I think I would have said that. Right now, I think you're going to have to find a way to get some stops defensively. How they do that, I'm not quite sure. I don't think they have the firepower to score 30 points right now. Kyren Williams has been really good. He scored a touchdown in 7 games in a row for the Rams. That ties a team record. He's been really good, but he can only do so much. And you look at what the Ram receiving core is right now. Really, no one has stepped into the void left by you're missing your 2 big guys in Kupp and Nakua. Demarcus Robinson has been relatively quiet. Tutu Atwell kind of saved the day against the 49ers. It was his best game as a Ram. He hasn't looked like that since. They're going to have to turn somebody over. They're going to have to maybe, the reason they beat San Francisco, they had a trick play. They had a fake punt. They had a big punt return. I think you got to get a little special teams lucky or play there. But I think somehow, some way, and it has not looked like they're capable of doing it, they're going to have to find a way to limit the Green Bay offense, to hold them into the low 20s if they're going to want to win this game. Because I think the Rams are going to have a very difficult time scoring more than 2 touchdowns. I really do.
Yeah. If I'm trying to, make a roadmap here for the Rams, I feel like it's Kyren Williams has 150 yards on 25 carries. And it's one of those games where you get 4 possessions every half.
Yeah, I was just going to say, limiting the possessions is key. And I was hoping that's what it might look like in Chicago. And it just didn't really. First half wasn't so bad. The Rams, but and this is another one of the keys to the game, I think, for the Rams, is when they get opportunities, they have to score touchdowns. They had the ball in the red zone 4 times in the first half. They kicked 3 field goals or 3 field goal attempts. They missed one along the way too. It's just, they really don't have a lot of opportunities, and the opportunities they have had, they've kicked field goals instead of scoring touchdowns.
So this is my key for the Green Bay Packers, and that is red zone offense. This has been a bugaboo for them this season. They're 23rd in red zone touchdown percentage. They score touchdowns less than 50% of the time. And when you don't have a good kicker, and the Packers, at least right now, do not have a good kicker, Braden Arvison, the rookie, they had to make the change late in the preseason process away from Anders Carlson, who was a nightmare for them last year. They just can't get this kicker thing figured out. I mean, this is one of those things that since Mason Crosby left, they've not had any answers. Mason Crosby was a Ram briefly there for a little bit. So that to me is the key, because it feels like the kind of game where if the Packers, to your point, if the Packers can score touchdowns when they get opportunities, and the Rams defense is just not good enough to not give them opportunities, they're going to have them. If they go 2 for 4 scoring touchdowns in the red zone, let's say, that's how the Rams can win. If they go 4 for 4, I kind of just don't think the Rams have enough to do it, barring some flukiness. That my secondary key would be no special teams nonsense.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, the fake punt, the punt return, the Packers, their coverage teams have been pretty good this year. They haven't made any other like wildly stupid mistakes yet.
Right.
But it's those kinds of things that can turn these games, a punt blocked here, those kinds of things. So it's score in the red zone if you're the Packers, and no special teams stupidity. Let's not say the name Rich Bisaccia during the game. And I think that's a good sign for Green Bay.
Yeah, I guess if you're trying to find a path for the Rams defensively, it would be you mentioned it earlier. Get pressure on the quarterback. They had 2 sacks taken off the board with defensive holding last week in the secondary, both by Jared Verse. If Jared Verse could kind of have his, welcome to the NFL nationally party and get 2 or 3 sacks and really blow up the game plan and get them off the field a couple of times, maybe a strip sack, something like that, because the back 7 of their defense, it's just, it is giving up a ton of plays, a ton of yards. The front 4, they're getting home. They're not getting a ton of sacks, but they are creating pressure. It's what's going on behind those guys that's the real soft spot.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on the red zone problems, the Rams are 28th in the NFL in red zone scoring, 41%. And the reason for that, and this is a trend around the league too. Teams are able to move the ball right now because it's dink and dunk. They can do all that stuff, but then they get into the red zone and they just go, what do we do?
Nowhere to go.
And what you need in the red zone are horses. You need guys to just win. It can't just be scheme. It's too condensed. It's too crowded. And you need quarterbacks that can throw into tight windows. The Packers and the Rams each have that. The Rams right now, without Nakua, without Kupp, they don't have the dudes. And I think that's the bigger issue for them. The Packers are just not executing. They're shooting themselves in the foot. It's dumb penalties. It's Josh Jacobs fumbling as he's going into the end zone. Like, those are the stupid things. They have the talent to be a really good red zone offense. They just haven't done it yet.
I'll throw one guy in there for the Rams that could be that player time, that guy that could just win one-on-one. And I think this is why he's here. It hasn't happened yet. They really haven't used him much. Is Colby Parkinson. He's a big body, 6'7".
On my fantasy team, I'm waiting. I'm like, they've got no one else. Throw him the ball.
Nada. I mean, they really have not done much with him at all. But, it's the NFL. Weird stuff happens. And all of a sudden, that guy that has been nowhere, it's like, wait, he had how many touchdowns? Again, the Rams plan, if you are a Rams fan, and this is what I say on Locked On Rams all the time, my everydayers will certainly know what I'm about to say. In Sean McVay, I trust. If there's a guy that can find a way to get it done with half a team, it's that guy over there. He's going to be there. He's got his quarterback. He always has a chance.
There's the narrative competition is always something that you and I like to talk about. I don't know that it matters really. But it's something fun for us to say. The Packers are coming at this going, there's no way we should be 2-2. They should have won that Eagles game. And they had every opportunity against Minnesota, balls off their hands, stupid penalties, just some silliness. They deserve to lose. Like, let's be clear, but like, they had their chances. They feel like they're better than a 2-2 football team. They still have Super Bowl aspirations.
Sure.
I think they would love to say, hey, Sean McVay, we to pull an Aaron Rodgers, we own you. We still own you. And so I like this. I think they're going to come in focused. I think this is the kind of game where, and I have so much respect for Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay. So please, Rams fans, don't take this the wrong way. I think those guys are incredible. But I think this is a game for the Packers to get right a little bit. I think the pass rush, we didn't even talk that much about that. The Packers pass rush, they ate the Titans lunch. They've been kind of meh in the other games. But guess what? This Rams offensive line is a problem. So I think they can do enough there. I think this could be one of those like 34-24 kind of games where the Packers make a little bit of a statement. The Rams go into the bye week licking their wounds. That's where I am right now.
Yeah, I think that score is probably about right. I don't know if the Rams can score 24 points as currently constructed. I think if they're going to win the game, it's probably 24. I think if they lose the game, it's probably something in the teens.
No.
The offensive line is playing 2 backups. A 7th-round rookie is their new. There's like you mentioned, it's very porous up front. The good news is probably the wrong word, but the thing is you got to win. And so it was San Francisco after coming into week 2. It was like, okay, you got to have this. And they found a way to get it done against their other arch nemesis, a team that has kind of turned them inside out for most of the McVay era, other than the NFC Championship game a few years ago. So hopefully the script remains the same. But if it does go Green Bay's way, and I agree with you, I think the Rams are going to struggle to win this game.
Peter and Travis, the great insight that they provide each and every week is incredible. And so for more on Peter and more on Travis, check them out at Locked On Packers and Locked On Rams, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's take it to San Francisco for an NFC West showdown. The Arizona Cardinals, Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr. taking on the San Francisco 49ers with Brock Purdy. San Francisco still dealing with some injuries. They did get Deebo Samuel back last week, but there are still uncertainty surrounding Christian McCaffrey and when/if he'll be able to return this season. So Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals and Brian Peacock of Locked On 49ers dive into key storylines, big matchups, and more ahead of the big game.
So looking at FanDuel, Niners favored by a touchdown in this one. So it would be a Cards upset, according to the bookmakers, Alex. And according to me, it would be a Cardinals upset. Would it be a Cardinals upset to you? What would that look like? Paint the picture for a Cardinals win Sunday at the San Francisco 49ers.
Everything would be erased. All of the negativity would be erased. It means Kyler Murray has a massive day. And that's the elixir for all things happiness in Arizona. The path to victory for the Cardinals, winning time of possession. They haven't been on the field for more than 27 minutes the last couple of weeks, which, it's like the Richter scale. I mean, you're in Northern California. I grew up in LA. Like, every number that goes up is 100 times worse than the one before, or 1,000 times worse, something like that. So the fact that the Cardinals have been on the field for only 27 minutes, leaving this depleted, talent-wise defense on the field for 33-plus minutes a game, it's a recipe for disaster, and it has been. So running the ball effectively is where it starts. James Conner had 100-plus rushing yards last week. A lot of it was in garbage time. A lot of it was on one drive that resulted in a touchdown that cut the game to a 13-point deficit. It wasn't early on. They threw the ball a lot early. Kyler Murray needs to be no longer a game manager, but more of a game wrecker. And this is going against everything that I said when the season started. Run the ball, play action, tight end, wide receivers. Kyler Murray stay behind the line of scrimmage. They got to scrap it at this point and just hope that he knows how to use his body and stay in space. Slide, roll, get out of bounds, LaDainian Tomlinson it, whatever you have to do to not get hit while getting chunk gains is something that Kyler Murray needs to do in an effort to win. And I know it's far-fetched because of the defense that they're playing against that knows him so well. Mitch Artavius Ward, this is his sixth time playing against Kyler Murray. Fred Warner's never not. Nick Bosa's never not. It's just they know him so well. So this is going to be scheme plus Kyler Murray in an effort to unlock this entire offense in an effort to be on the field for longer than the defense is. And that's the only way the Cardinals are going to win, because there's no track record of this defense as currently constructed being able to stop this offense, regardless of if Christian McCaffrey's there or not.
The 49ers have had a few bouts this season with not being able to get off the field on third downs. And I think that is absolutely one of the keys. And for the Arizona Cardinals to be able to run the ball a little bit against the 49ers, be able to keep converting those third downs and not just have big plays, but have, long drives that keeps the 49ers off the field. And of course, that's what the 49ers are built on, staying in front of the sticks, running the ball well. Jordan Mason's number 2 in the NFL. It wasn't for Derrick Henry going for 200 yards last week. He would be the league's leading rusher right now. That's without Christian McCaffrey on the field. So the 49ers still can run the ball, and they're still, a balanced offense. And these days, a balanced offense means you're kind of a run-first offense. And so they're going to run the ball. Kyle Shanahan wants to be able to have his entire playbook at his disposal. So, that's obviously task number one for the Cardinals, is to stop the 49ers run game. It's task number one for every team that ever plays Kyle Shanahan and a Mike Shanahan before that football team. So can the Cardinals do that? I have my doubts if the Cardinals defense is going to be up to the challenge there. And so that's why I like the 49ers to win this game, because Kyle Shanahan will be able to be in his bag. He will be able to run the football effectively. He will be able to play around with some wide back. And then you get Deebo Samuel in the backfield. And then you get Juwan Jennings out on the field as well. And, a little use check here and there. You get Kittle over the middle if you're trying to pay too much attention to other guys. So there's just too many weapons and too many ways that Kyle Shanahan can beat you if he's able to get in his bag, if he's able to keep the offense balanced and not become one-dimensional. So for the Cardinals, don't let them score early, because you don't want to be chasing the Cardinals, because you become a little bit more one-dimensional. You want to be able to, have a close game, have the lead, be able to run and pass in just about any time you want it, and make the defense respect that. And I kind of expect that is the way that things are going to go on Sunday, and the 49ers will be able to win this one. 7 points, though. I thought 10 felt like a lot, the way the 49ers had laid a couple eggs last week against the Patriots, and they just destroyed the New England Patriots. Now, Cardinals have a much better offensive line, so 7 points is kind of a lot, but it's at home. What we saw the last week, I kind of like the Niners, and I would maybe even get up those 7 points. I don't know if I want to make a pure score prediction here in this one, but I do like the 49ers for that reason, because I don't think when you're drawing all these, you're like, okay, we need this to happen for the Cardinals on offense. Oh, the 49ers have players that can stop that. One of the best offenses in the league right now is the San Francisco 49ers. Can the Arizona Cardinals defense stop that, stop what they're trying to do? And I have a harder time believing that story than the other story.
Yeah. I mean, they did play a lot of catch up that ballooned those numbers against Minnesota. Okay. they had the lead and then lost it all to the Rams. So it's not just the stats tell the story. And they played a bad New England team last week. Like, yes, their offense is formidable, of course. It's Kyle Shanahan calling card. The one thing the Cardinals have going for them is the NFL may, like, not literally, but this is a perfect time for the NFL to be like, knock, knock, knock. Remember, crazy things happen. This just feels like one of those games where it's like, there's no way the Cardinals should be in contention in this game. And this is the time where the Cardinals have a Matt Prater 55-yard field goal to win by 1 and walk it off in some random fashion. We've seen this happen between these teams a lot where the Cardinals go to Levi. They've had good success at Levi Stadium, average success. They've won a couple games there with Kyler Murray there. Is there a strong chance that it's going to happen? No, I'm not going to be a meteorologist and say it's not going to rain when the clouds are in the air. Like, I get all of that. Having said that, the Cardinals have been a couple plays in each of their 2 losses, aside from this past week, from starting 3-0. And they play Buffalo, which is a good team, and they play Detroit, which I would take in a 7-game series over San Francisco. So I think that if the Cardinals don't beat themselves, they don't have 3 and outs, and they can stay on the field, this is going to be a closer game than people expect. I don't know if they'll cover the 7. I don't know if they're going to win, but I think that if the Cardinals don't beat themselves, this will be a closer game than people anticipate.
And it's not like the Cards are going to be surprised, not only because the 49ers are a familiar opponent, but the Cardinals have played a more difficult schedule than the 49ers have this year. The Niners haven't seen a team as good as the Bills or as good as the Lions so far this year. So it's going to be an interesting one. And
Let me ask you this, because I want to ask you this before we get out of here. I'm sorry to interrupt.
It's okay.
You've seen enough sample size, and I'm not a Brock Purdy hater by any stretch. I don't. I see what I'm like, cool. People are just jealous they don't have that spot, and they've had other quarterbacks who have not been able to execute the way he has. I understand all of that. Him being a 300-plus yard per game passer out of 10, let's say out of 5, how much does that worry you in the long run where, Christian McCaffrey's on Mars checking out his Achilles, it's stuff that, like, 1 to 5 for the entire season? How sustainable, how much does that worry you in the big picture?
It worries me like a 1 out of 5. It doesn't worry me at all. If that's the right number on the meter, if you mean. So low means it doesn't worry me a lot. It doesn't. I have utmost respect and belief in Brock Purdy. I think there's some things he's limited at, is where, there's balls he can't fit in. He can't be that late on a throw like, say, Josh Allen can. But he's so good. He makes plays with his legs. He is so smart. He knows where to go with the football. He'll do some weird things occasionally, but the 49ers, I think, he just have proven, and he has proven. And by the way, they've run the ball fine without Christian McCaffrey. So he adds an element for sure, but they can go wide back to get a little bit more Deebo Samuel pass catching element out of the backfield if they want to replace the Christian McCaffrey usage. So McCaffrey usage is really McCaffrey is just kind of icing on the cake for the 49ers. And a lot of people wanted to make it seem like McCaffrey makes the offense go, as if Kyle Shanahan's never been able to run the ball before Christian McCaffrey showed up, right? McCaffrey's not that. And McCaffrey's awesome, but he's the icing on the cake. The 49ers still have that cake. And, sometimes I kind of prefer cake without icing. I don't know if that's weird.
You're a maniac.
But I do. And that's kind of what the 49ers are right now. There's still cake, and it's still really good. And multiple layers of cake. And if you cover up Ayuk, you bracket him, Juwan Jennings is going for 11 catches, 170 yards, and 3 touchdowns, right? And they're still able to run the ball. So, and Brock Purdy has been really awesome. I'm a 100% believer in Brock Purdy, his ability to facilitate and make all of that go. And if they need to lean on Brock Purdy, I got no problems with it. And I think they'll be just fine on the offensive side of the ball. And by the way, Brock Purdy, man, he was forged in that Arizona heat. And for some reason, the marine layer just pieced out in the Bay Area. It's 90 degrees where I am. It's never 90 degrees where I am. And I'm cooking right now. And so I understand how it is now to be forged in that. And I'm not built that way. I'm not built that way anymore. I'm too soft. It's 65.
Prenatal.
Yeah, exactly.
Prenatal when it comes to understanding what it's like to be in the heat. Okay.
So Brock Purdy understands that. And so he's made for the heat. And it's going to be a fun game. And division games are always close. And as you mentioned, Alex, the NFL is chaos. So don't go marking down any wins yet, even though I do like the 49ers by by 8 in this one.
For more on Alex, more on Brian, check them out over at Locked On Cardinals and Locked On 49ers, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Next up, the Las Vegas Raiders are in the middle of Davante Adams trade rumors central after the wide receiver requested a trade from the franchise. They'll be going to Denver to take on the Broncos. Bo Nix and that team led a very big win over the New York Jets in week 4. Sloppy win, but a win is a win. So your boy Q of Locked On Raiders and Sarah Bettinger of Locked On Broncos have everything you need to know about the game and things you need to look out for.
We're jumping into the fourth quarter of Crossover Thursday. Locked On Broncos, Locked On Raiders. We're going to be talking about some keys to victory. Can Bo Nix become the first Denver Broncos quarterback to win 3 straight games as a rookie? Or are the Raiders, are they going to win their 9th straight game against the Broncos? Q, it's one of those talking points that came up a lot over the offseason as everybody's doing their offseason victory laps. Every team's undefeated, right? The Raiders undefeated against the Broncos since late in 2019. It's been a rough streak against this team for the Broncos. So in order for the Raiders to get to their 9th straight win against Denver, what's got to happen?
Well, I'll start with the offense. Offensively, they've got to find out their identity. They've got to establish who they're going to be. Again, without Davante Adams, they've got other guys there. They've got Jacoby Myers, who's a really good wide receiver. Brock Bowers is a hot shot rookie. How are you going to get those guys involved? How are you going to get them to be a focal point of the offense? And what kind of version of the run game are we going to see, right? There has to be, for this Luke Getsy offense to work. And I'm still not 100% convinced that Luke Getsy's offense is going to work, right? Let me be 100% honest with that. The jury's still out on Luke Getsy as an OC and a play caller. Can he be that guy? But I do know for this offense to go, the run game has to be there. It has to be present. Last week, it was the best version of it at 152 yards on 29 carries. That's how the Raiders want to butter their bread. They want to be able to have that run game. So can they do that? And that allows Gardner Minshew to not feel like the game is on him and he's got to do everything, right? You want him to have less than 30 passes in a game if possible. And so he had that last week against Cleveland. The Raiders found a way to win. Can they go back to the run game? Have they figured it out? Like what works for them? That's what we want to see. Is it something that they can sustain, or was that a one-off thing? So far, this Raiders season has been it's been like you're at the roller coaster, or you're on the amusement park, right? It's just a big roller coaster ride. They can't be that. They've got to be steady Eddie. Who can they, rely on? Who can they, say that, okay, this is how this team is going to go. That's the biggest question offensively, is who can they be consistently, and can they find that success on a Sunday against the Denver Broncos defense that's really good and really stout up front that can get to the quarterback? Can that offensive line, can they protect Minshew? Can they open up some holes in the running game? That's that's going to be one of the big keys. Can they find that consistent offense? Defensively, they got to make life miserable for Bo Nix. They've got, as you mentioned, he hasn't been sacked since the Steelers game. That's quite a while. They've got to get familiar with Bo Nix. He's a rookie. They've got to introduce themselves, whether it's Max Crosby or not. Christian Wilkins, Tyree Wilson, Janarius Robinson. He's got to show Charles Snowden, these guys. And I know everyone's not a household name, but they've got to make themselves a household name. They've got to get to the quarterback. They've got to get to that win rate. Obviously the Broncos and the Raiders are both really good at that. They've got to get back to that. If they can do that and show that pressure that they've been doing, pretty much all season long, then it makes, the corner's job a little bit easier. It makes the safety's job a little bit easier. Jacorian Bennett, he's a name to watch. He's not Pat Surtain, but he's playing really good ball at the cornerback position. Really a lot of pass breakups on third down as well. Something to definitely pay attention to. He's number 0. You can't miss him. The no-fly zone, according to his jersey number. So we'll see if he's able to have that success out there. He's playing with a lot of confidence. Jack Jones on the other side. He's a playmaker. I always say that the Raiders need to come up with a couple turnovers just to give their offense a shorter field. I think that kind of goes without saying, but they've got to be able to slow down the run. Not allow that 100-yard rusher or combined rushing, whatever the case may be. They've got to be able to, consistently slow that down. And last week was the first time they've done that. So there's a lot of questions with this team offensively and defensively. They've got the parts in place to make it happen. But again, it goes back to the C word. Can they do it consistently? That's kind of the MO for the Raiders. And that's what the MO has really been all season long. For Denver, to get their victory and improve to 3-2 overall on the season, what has to happen?
Well, I think number one, they got to get Bo Nix going again. Number two, like we just talked about, keep the pass rush heat on. And number three, keep Javonte Williams rolling. And let's start kind of breaking it down there. Javonte, like I said, had been horrible dating back to last year. I mean, he was averaging 2.2 yards a carry going into last week's game against the New York Jets. Didn't look like himself. Didn't even look like, man, when Audric Estime gets activated off IR, are they even going to keep Javonte Williams? I mean, it was that bad. So to see him have a sort of re-breakout game after the knee injury in 2022, it was awesome for the Denver Broncos to see. So can you keep that going? And for Bo Nix, getting him going again, we saw against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, just hitting downfield shots, being accurate on the mid-range throws, getting rid of the ball quickly, making great decisions as a runner. And I think that's something that's really been key for him in getting that momentum as a passer, oddly enough, is really, hey, when you break the pocket and when you get out and you make a play with your legs, it kind of just feels like something just clicks with Bo, where he's able to kind of start getting a rhythm passing. So can they keep getting him going after the second half against the Jets, where he started to hit some downfield throws through his first touchdown pass of the season to Cortland Sutton? But really, this Denver Broncos team, I don't know that I can necessarily say after just 4 games, but live and die by the pass rush. I mean, these guys are getting after the quarterback, and they're forcing teams to have to throw a lot. You talked about that with the Raiders. Like, you don't want Gardner throwing 30 plus times in the game. Right. That's what the Broncos absolutely want him to do. So it plays perfectly the keys to victory on both sides, because Vance Joseph in that defensive front, they are knocking guys back every down. And they forced Breece Hall had 10 carries for 4 yards last week against the Jets. They have been dominating up front defensively. And so that's not to say that it can't change though in 1 week, because we've seen the Broncos get susceptible against Kenneth Walker and the Seahawks in week 1. They gave up a number of big chunk plays. They've had problems with penalties deep downfield. So there's things like that pop up every so often, but can you maintain that level of physicality and force the ball into Gardner's hands so that you can let that pass rush feast and let Vance Joseph keep on cooking up these different pass rush schemes that he's been doing? So it should be an exciting matchup on Sunday, Q. I know these two teams, they're trying to keep pace right now with the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC West. The Chiefs, I mean, I said it jokingly earlier, but man, they just seem to find a way to win these games. It doesn't matter if it's 17 points against the Chargers or if they got to score 35 against whoever, they seem to be able to figure it out. So these two AFC West teams got to figure it out and get these wins early in the season to do what they can to keep pace in the division. And we'll find out more about the identity of both of these teams as they continue to go along. As Q's talking about, the Raiders seeking their identity on offense, the Broncos kind of trying to find any sort of groove that they can, buying into the Bo Nix experience.
For more on Q, for more on Say, you can check them out over at Locked On Raiders and Locked On Broncos, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Last one of these 4 p.m. games, the New York Giants have found a star in Malik Neighbors, but they still had a tough loss to Dallas in Week 4 on Thursday Night Football. And the Seattle Seahawks suffered their first loss of the season in primetime to the Detroit Lions. So 2 teams looking to bounce back. Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants and Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks talk about which team will bounce back and more.
Welcome back to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. Glad to be teaming up with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants. A special thanks to all the 12s and Giants country, as always, for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks and Locked On Giants your first listen 5 days a week. It's time to dive into keys to victory and predictions. Patricia, this Giants team, as you mentioned, a lot of self-inflicted wounds have really been a culprit for them starting off 1-3, another dismal start to the season with a lot of people under a lot of pressure right now, including Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones, the head coach quarterback combination. When you look at this game from New York's perspective, with or without Malik Neighbors, when you look at this game, what do you think are the keys for the Giants to be able to go to Seattle and pull off an upset, which, by the way, they've done recently? They did it in 2020. I know that feels like a long time ago now, but they have come to the Pacific Northwest and pulled off an upset before. What are the ingredients for Brian Daboll's team to do that again on Sunday?
Well, first and foremost, they cannot, and I repeat, cannot have penalties on scoring drives. That's been a problem for them. I want to say 30 something percent of the penalties that they have had have resulted in stalled scoring drives. So you can't have that. Now, obviously, playing in front of the 12th man, loud environment. I expect the Giants to use a lot of silent counts. So they've got to be sharp, because when you're using silent counts, that's where you can have even more mistakes. So no pre-snap penalties. That's number one. Number two, they've got to get that run game going. You mentioned the injuries to the defensive line. It's now or never for that Giants run game. Now, Devin Singletary is dealing with a groin issue. I think he's going to play, though. I don't know how effective he's going to be. Maybe we see a little sprinkling of Tyrone Tracy and Eric Gray, a little bit more than what we've seen. But the Giants just can't be one-dimensional. The other thing, the drops. The Giant receivers are dropping at least one pass per game, and they're coming at the worst possible time. But I would say the biggest key, Corbin, is in the red zone. The Giants have been terrible in the red zone this year. They've had no problems going up and down between the 20s. The red zone has been an issue. I would like to see Giants head coach Brian Dable, who is calling the plays this year, I'd like to see him start maybe calling for some plays to the tight ends who have been woefully underused in this offense. So, red zone, not committing penalties despite the anticipated noise level, and just really avoid the self-inflicted wounds. And I think if the Giants can do that, play a clean game, I think they should be able to be competitive.
From a Seahawks perspective, the first one's going to seem like one that's a low-hanging fruit. But look, the Seahawks in the game on Monday night, Detroit had 13 first downs in the first half, and they only had 2 third-down conversions in that. They were consistently moving the chains on first and second down, and they continued to do that in the second half. They had a 70-yard touchdown to Jameson Williams on a first down immediately after the Seahawks had scored to get some of that momentum back. Poof, it is gone with that long touchdown. They have got to win on early downs. You've got to force the Giants into more third down opportunities, particularly you'd like to see 3rd and 5 and longer, so that you can have your rushers pin their ears back and come after Daniel Jones. They have got to win on first down in particular. The Lions were dominant on that first down, on first downs in general in Monday's game. If the Seahawks continue to have issues giving up fairly sizable run plays and giving up long completions on first down, and even 7-8 yard completions to set up a favorable second down, they have got to have a much higher hit rate in terms of winning on those early downs defensively. And I think if they can do that, it's going to open up the pass rush. It's going to open up opportunities for turnovers. They weren't able to get those dominoes going on Monday night. So they've got to be able to play at a higher level on first and second down on defense. Penalties, I'm going to go with a familiar theme with you. This has been a team that's been penalized a lot. And unfortunately, it hasn't been mostly penalties that you can live with. There's always good penalties in terms of effort. But those have not been a lot of the penalties Seattle's been having called against them. They have got to find a way to play more disciplined football, and this is on both sides of the ball. Because if you are giving free yardage to the underdog, that dramatically improves their chances to come into Seattle. In fact, I remember 2020, that was a big problem for the Seattle Seahawks in that game. They had a lot of penalties that kept Colt McCoy and company in that game, and they ended up winning it. And from an offensive standpoint, just get the darn ball to your skill players. You mentioned the struggles that Deonte Banks has had, and just in general, it feels like Dexter Lawrence by himself has been able to neutralize some of the issues that the Giants have had defensively, just because of how dominant he is. Seattle knows that firsthand. Blocking him is always difficult, but can you get the ball to DK Metcalf and your playmakers? Because this feels like a Giants secondary that's ripe for giving up some big plays. You got to give Geno Smith the time to be able to do that, though. So it boils down to the pass protection. I'm saying this: 2 or fewer sacks, 5 or fewer quarterback hits. To me, those are the magic numbers. If they can do that, and Geno is able to get the football to his receivers, especially with home field advantage, I'd feel really good about the Seahawks being able to bounce back and win this football game against the Giants secondary that, quite frankly, on tape, I have not been that impressed with here in these first few games. Let's get to the predictions now, shall we? Obviously, we're going to have our score predictions on our Friday shows, but as we do every week, we're going to look at the spread and discuss some predictions from that standpoint. And right now, Patricia, the Giants are 6.5-point underdogs heading into this week with a 43.5-point over under. So it's lower than last week, Giants and Lions Seahawks game. but it's a 6.5 point spread. Considering New York's season so far, starting 1-3, they have to travel cross country to Lumen Field. Do you think the Giants cover that 6.5 point spread, or do you think they're going to have a difficult time doing that?
I don't think they're going to cover it. This team's averaging 15 points per game, less than what they averaged last year, just by a fraction, but still less. Seattle, they scored 29 points in a loss to the Detroit Lions. All right. I don't see, I mean, the Giants offense, like I said, the run game hasn't been there. And now you've got the injury to Devin Singletary. You may not have Malik Neighbors. You know, you've got the drops and everything. And let's not forget, I haven't even mentioned Daniel Jones in this equation. Daniel Jones has been inconsistent with underthrowing guys or overthrowing guys. So, I mean, I just don't see it. I think the Giants, quite honestly, they'll be lucky if they score 17 points in this game. So, I think that the Seahawks, given the weapons they have, given that it sounds like their offense is a little bit healthier in terms of their skill position players, I think they're gonna go crazy, especially against, like I said, the struggling Giants cornerbacks. Which by the way, there's still injuries there that I didn't talk about. Drew Phillips, the slot cornerback, not practicing. He's got a calf. Adoree Jackson, not practicing. He's got a calf. They're both in danger of missing their second straight game. So, yeah, I'm concerned about that secondary.
Look, I'm always scared of trap games, especially when you get into the month of October. Like this matchup, I look back at that 2020 game, for example, and I think about the horror that was the heavily favored Seahawks somehow losing that game and coughing it up and the offense not performing. And so I always look at games like this with kind of that eye half open, like, I don't know, this could be a I feel like Mike McDonald's not going to allow that to happen. Now, I don't know. I'm going to dish out my score prediction tomorrow, but I think coming back to home is going to help. I think 6.5 points. I think they're going to be able to cover that. I'm not going to say right now how much I think they're going to cover that, but I think they're going to be able to cover that spread. I just think that they are a better football team. I think they're going to be healthier in defense than they were last week. I'm not saying to take the Giants lightly at all. I think the Giants are more than capable of coming in. If you aren't ready, any NFL team can come in and win. But it feels like there are a lot of advantages that should, in theory, work to Seattle's advantage. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think they're going to cover.
A lot to look forward to in that game. For more on Patricia, more on Corbin, check them out over at Locked On Giants and Locked On Seahawks, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That'll do it for the 4 o'clock window. But 2 primetime games that are going to be incredible. We're going to dive into those in the final part of the show here on the Ultimate NFL Pregame Show. Don't go anywhere. You won't want to miss what we have coming up here next. First, the show is brought to you by PrizePicks, and PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So if you think Justin Jefferson will get more than 83.5 yards this upcoming week, or maybe Jordan Mason will run for more than 75.5 yards, cook up hot takes with your friends who win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on PrizePicks. So going back to that Ravens and Bengals game, I really think that, this Ravens team, maybe they want to get Zay Flowers involved. So more on the Zay Flowers receiving yards. Maybe it's not Jamar Chase. Maybe it's T. Higgins. He can take more on T. Higgins receiving yards as well. Download the app today and use code LOCKDOWNNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use code LOCKDOWNNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. We return. Ultimate NFL Pregame Show. Kevin Oestreicher rounding things out with you here today. Again, appreciate everybody for tuning in. We are your one-stop shop for everything NFL, keys, predictions, game time storylines, and so much more. With the help of our local experts, we bring you everything you need to know leading up to game time. We've talked about the 1 p.m. games. We've talked about the 4 o'clock games, but prime time is going to be a treat this week in week 5. We'll start off with that Sunday night matchup. The Dallas Cowboys coming off of a much needed win against the New York Giants go to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers, who are coming off a tough loss to a familiar quarterback in Joe Flacco, although he was in a Colts uniform, not a Ravens uniform. But nonetheless, you have a lot of conversation with what could happen in that game. Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys, Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, get you ready for the game.
We're back here on Crossover Thursday, here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, Marcus Mosher of Locked On Cowboys. All right, Marcus, let's talk about some matchups. And I want to toss this matchup to you to talk about how do the Cowboys plan to stymie TJ Watt. He was averaging a sack a game until the Colts game. And I know some Steelers fans will complain about holding calls. But he didn't get a sack, and the Colts had a plan. Is there something in that plan from what you saw in the game that the Cowboys can replicate to slow down TJ Watt and protect Dak Prescott?
It's got to be a team effort, right? Because Terrence Steele, the Cowboys' right tackle, isn't going to be able to do it by himself. If they leave Steele one-on-one with an island against Watt, they're going to lose that matchup. So what I expect the Cowboys to do is to line up tight ends, fullbacks, even some wide receivers in tight splits, just to push TJ Watt out further. We saw last week against the Colts. I mean, on some of these formations, it's almost like TJ Watt's lining up as a slot corner. That's how far he's pushed out because of the formation. So I do expect the Cowboys to do that quite a bit. The other thing is it's Dak, right? We saw last week with Joe Flacco, he got rid of the ball quickly. And that makes it where it's just a little bit harder for TJ Watt to get around the edge. If your first read's not open, Dak, and your outlet's not, you got to take off and run, or you got to throw the ball away. This can't be a game where you feel comfortable sitting in the pocket, hoping things develop, because that's how a lot of these sacks happen. So it's got to be a team effort. It's got to be a good job by Mike McCarthy with formations. You need the players to actually block and at least slow Watt down, and then you need Dak to do his part and not hold on to the ball and not take sacks. I'm a firm believer that sacks are a quarterback stat. That's why most of the best quarterbacks in the league just don't take sacks, because they're getting rid of the ball. They're knowing when to clock it. Dak is generally pretty good at it, but he does struggle from that blind side. So keep an eye on that matchup.
That's certainly a big matchup here. Another matchup I want to point to is less a physical one and more of a mental one, and it involves Dak Prescott. And the guy I'm matching him up with is Patrick Queen, because as we talked about in the opening segment, the middle of the Steelers defense is where I think the Colts were able to get a lot of wins in this game, but a lot of it came because of miscommunication errors in the Steelers secondary and line, primarily in the secondary. But after the game, like you look at again the first touchdown, Josh Downs goes in motion, Joey Porter Jr. doesn't run with him, he is wide open in the end zone. The second touchdown, I think it was I forget his name right now. Ogletree. He runs a slant over the middle. Beanie Bishop is the only Steelers defender who stays in man coverage while everyone's in zone, leaves his zone wide open, catches the ball, walks into the end zone. And Patrick Queen after the game was like, "Hey, that's on me. I have to be the guy. I was brought here to be the quarterback of this defense. I got to make sure everyone's on the right page." And that's where I think that if you're the Cowboys and you're Dak Prescott, and part of it's also the game plan before, but at the line of scrimmage, you get into the line of scrimmage early, you're motioning guys around, and you're trying to find those mismatches. How can I create confusion in that coverage, create some busted coverage opportunities, or simply create the matchups that I really want, like CeeDee Lamb against Beanie Bishop, CeeDee Lamb against Patrick Queen or Deshaun Elliott, and get them in spots where I can, hey, this is definitely an opportunity for us here pre-snap. And if you're Patrick Queen, how can we make sure that doesn't happen, but also how can we disguise those as saying, hey, yeah, you think that's over there, but that's actually where we want you to throw, because Minka's going to be jumping into that spot soon. Marcus, I think this is some of the fun things that I do when I look at all 22. I want to see how is play structure working out. What was the plan here? Do I watch the game a third time and I'm like, okay, now I get it. How do you see this playing out in this kind of a chess match?
Yeah, so the Cowboys just don't use as much pre-snap motion as Shane Steichen and the Colts do. They don't play action as much either, and that's a very RPO-heavy offense over in Indianapolis. So they won't be doing that, but what they will be doing is trying to beat you by formation. So a lot of trips, bunch sets where it's really tight, and CeeDee Lamb's lined up behind like two big tight ends like Jake Ferguson and Luke Schoonmaker, where you can't see him until he's already off the line of scrimmage. or certain formations where he's the outside receiver, but it's bunched so close that now he's got a lot of room to operate. That's how the Cowboys are going to try to beat you. It's not overly complex. It's pretty simple, but it's been pretty effective with Mike McCarthy, not only in Dallas, but in Green Bay as well. I think this is going to be a easier matchup for Pittsburgh. They're just not going to have to think as much. There's not going to be as much eye candy for Patrick Queen and Peyton Wilson and Landon Roberts to watch, but it's still going to be difficult to defend.
I agree. I think. Listen, the Cowboys ain't no dummies. They're gonna have a plan to try to get out there. Give me one more matchup in this game that you're looking at in particular that you think could be one that you're circling when you're watching this.
Let's go to special teams. Chris Boswell and Brandon Aubrey might be the two best kickers in the NFL right now. Brandon Aubrey's been unbelievable at kicking over 50 yards. He made a 60-yarder last week with room to spare. However, kicking in Pittsburgh on a Sunday night game is always a little bit different, right? Kicking into that open end of the stadium. I've got no doubts that Chris Boswell is probably going to nail a 50-yarder if Mike Tomlin decides to give him the opportunity to kick. That's been a little bit of an issue in the past, but who can make their long kicks? Because I do think this is going to be somewhat of a field position game. The Cowboys defense is going to need as much room as possible to operate, right? Like if they're giving the Steelers short fields, they're going to score in this one. So keep an eye on these kickers. Which coach trusts their kicker more? I know that's a nerdy answer, but Boswell and Aubrey are awesome. Watch those guys and appreciate them.
No, that is a really cool point. I don't think I've ever in all my years of Locked On, seen kickers be a matchup that we've talked about. That's a very unique position like that. I like that. I'm going to flip to the other side real quick, back to the Steelers. I'm bringing up the Steelers quarterback, Justin Fields. I think, this is a matchup not just with the Cowboys, but also with the Steelers themselves, because I think one of the problems the Steelers ran into last week and a little bit against the Chargers, they just didn't have to pay for it too much, is teams are obviously run blitzing at times, and Justin Fields isn't switching out of it. Now, is that on Justin Fields, or is that just a game plan and they're saying, hey, stick to it, just let's run this, and if they call the right blitz, they call the right blitz, but we want to stick to this pace here. I think, like you were talking about, especially with the players that you're mentioning in Lawrence and Parsons, the Cowboys are going to have to get a little bit more aggressive at times, and especially if you want to stop the run. And when that happens, the Steelers are going to have to make a decision. If the run game's going, great, awesome, then you don't have to do this. But if it's going early, the Steelers need a curveball or a change-up pitch of some sort for Justin Fields to at the line be like, all right, they're bringing that again. We have this is our counter. I haven't seen them do that a lot this year, and if they if that leads to them being a slow starter on offense again this week, and the Cowboys offense gets it, and this leads to a loss, that would be a major talking point. And then all of a sudden, that Russell Wilson conversation gets a little louder and louder and louder.
And you wonder how much they want to change the plays at the line of scrimmage with, yet again, another week with the new offensive line combination, right? You mentioned this is Ciamalo's first game back from the pec injury. Zach Frazier, he started 4 games, but still a young player. This will be Mason McCormick's first start. You don't want to try to overcomplicate things for an offensive line that's still trying to gel together, but you might not have any choice if the Cowboys are giving you looks that just aren't very favorable. Keep an eye on that. It should be a good matchup to watch.
Dallas is super injured right now, and the Steelers are looking to bounce back. Should be a really exciting game for Warren Marcus, Warren Chris. Check them out over at Locked On Cowboys and Locked On Steelers, respectively, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Last game of the week, Monday Night Football. The New Orleans Saints, after a scorching start, have cooled off considerably, losing 2 straight games. And the Kansas City Chiefs keep finding ways to win. They're still undefeated at 4-0. Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints, Chris Clark of Locked On Chiefs have the key storylines, big matchups, and more that you need to know.
All right, everybody, wrapping up this crossover Thursday edition. Locked On Chiefs, Locked On Saints, brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks, where you can head today. You're going to be able to get $50 instantly when you play $5 by using the promo code LOCKEDONNFL when you download the PrizePicks app. Here to break down the Chiefs and the Saints' keys to victory for this matchup, what it is that they need to do to get a win. So I'll start us off here with the away team stuff. I'll give you my 3. We'll go Chris's 3, and then we'll kind of break them down. But my 3 are pretty simple. We're looking to
See if the New Orleans Saints can protect Derek Carr, give him some comfort, give him some time. That's got to be number one. Number two is that they need to be able to generate a pass rush over on the other side and maybe stop that comfort, maybe stop and throw off some of that timing for Patrick Mahomes in the offense. And then the final thing for me is that the Saints just have to be out of their own way. One of the biggest issues for New Orleans so far this season is that they haven't just been playing against the opponent across from them. They've had to play against themselves, and they've typically beat themselves on the wrong side of that conversation. So for me, Chris, those are the three things that New Orleans is going to have to do to even sniff the idea of an upset here.
And, I could basically copycats exactly what you said, because really you look at this game, and one of the things I looked at before we started was the Chiefs are -4 in turnover differential. And that doesn't seem like that's a lot, but considering you've only played 4 games, that's not great.
Yeah.
And the only teams below them are the 2-2 Raiders, the 2-2 Philadelphia Eagles, and the 1-3 Tennessee Titans. So you have all teams that don't have a winning record, and somehow the Chiefs are 4-0, even though they've turned the ball over more than they've gotten it back. That's a huge problem. And when you talk about beating themselves, that's what I mean by beating themselves. Patrick Mahomes has thrown a pick in every single game. Carson Steele's put the ball on the ground twice. So that's something to watch for, although I don't know he's going to be starting in this game. He may not even really play that much in this game, considering it looks like Kansas City is kind of trying to move to Kareem Hunt based on what they did last week. And if Clyde Edwards-Helaire comes back and Samaje Perine is still available, maybe Carson Steele is going to be just a fullback and not really get the carries like it looked like he was going to do it early in the season. And then the big question is what's the Chiefs offensive line going to do? And can Patrick Mahomes start to trust their offensive line? Because the reality of going back and watching film with this team is he doesn't trust his offensive line, and it shows. Just about every single play that he is flushed out of the pocket, I take that back. Before last week, just about every play he was flushed out of the pocket, there was real pressure. Last week, you started to see happy feet where there wasn't necessarily pressure. He was expecting it to be coming, but he could have stayed there and made a different throw or looked downfield. And that's a problem. You have to trust your offensive lineman, and the Chiefs' offensive line really hasn't gotten it done. And it doesn't show in stats on PFF as much, but if you go watch the film, you'll watch the left side of the offensive line caving more often than not, and that is a severe problem.
Yeah, that's big. It's interesting. I think about how good this Kansas City defense has been, but part of that turnover ratio conversation where the New Orleans Saints have right now a +3 when it comes to their turnover ratio, just to compare the two here, is that the Kansas City Chiefs defense, the Kansas City Chiefs have only forced 3 turnovers so far. So interesting in that situation. New Orleans has forced 8 turnovers, one of the top in the NFL when it comes to that count at the moment. So
which doesn't sound good for Kansas City.
That doesn't sound great for Kansas City. That sounds a lot better for New Orleans than most of the things that I think of off the top of my head when I think about this matchup. And I think that like so much of this conversation sometimes too is like a conversation of reputation, right? Oh, it's the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think that carries some weight though, because there's, especially in a primetime environment, I get to experience Arrowhead Stadium for the first time, and I get to experience it at a primetime game. Incredible. Like, it's a tough environment to go in and win, that's for sure. But there are these little places where maybe you can see kind of the cracks in the foundation where the New Orleans Saints might be able to take advantage of something. Is that hopeful thinking? Is that like wishful thinking, or is there like a real vulnerability here?
Well, if you go back and watch, or if you go back and look at the Chiefs games, the Baltimore Ravens game, they almost lost and probably could have lost, I guess, if you look at it, because Likely basically comes down with like an inch of his shoe over the line, and they were going to go for 2. So could have had a loss there. The pass interference call, which I think most people would agree was a good call, puts the game in Kansas City's favor in that situation. And you look at the Falcons game, there was another pass interference call, the drive before the final. And I mean, there's just lots of different things that Kansas City is, 1 or 2 plays away from being in a much worse situation record wise. And when you look at the injuries that they have, it would make sense for them to be in a much worse situation record wise. The issue that works in their favor is they have Andy Reid as their head coach, although that can also work against them at times, specifically if they get up early on somebody. But the other part of it is they have C. Spagnuolo, and this defense has been lights out when it has mattered most. Chris Jones has played very well. The only time that he really hasn't played great, I think, was against the Falcons, where I think he only had 2 pressures, which was surprising because the Falcons had offensive linemen that were missing. The same type of thing that'll happen with the Saints, it sounds like, this week. And you expect a guy that is, wants to be the defensive player of the year, and I think has the talent to be defensive player of the year at times, to dominate those types of performances, especially considering they allow him to move around on the defensive line and basically line up where he wants to.
Right. Yeah, there's something about the Atlanta Falcons. For whatever reason, whenever their offensive line is hurt, they perform much better. Maybe they should reconsider who their starters are in those situations, but that always seems to be the case for them. I don't know what that's all about.
It's just really weird because Cousins doesn't move. Like, he is such a statue in the pocket. You would think that that's going to be a problem, and somehow it just wasn't. So, something to watch. I'm really going to be curious to see how this game turns out, because there's a ton of speed that the Saints have, and obviously injuries can play into this, and we don't really know where those are going to be at this point, since it's a Monday night game. But Kansas City is in a situation where if they can find a way to get to 5-0, they have their bye week and they can regroup. They can try to figure things out going into a game against the San Francisco 49ers. And if you're sitting there at 5-0, you feel a lot better going up against the 49er team. And even if you drop to 5-1, you still feel great going into a much easier part of the schedule after the Saints and the Niners.
Yeah. This is a big part of it's so funny how much this aligns between the Chiefs and the Saints. The Saints schedule gets remarkably easier after this game and then their next game up against Tampa. And then after that, it gets a little bit easier depending upon what Denver ends up looking like. I know that defense has played really well over there, but the offense has been pretty putrid and very un-Sean Payton-like. But for New Orleans, going into this game, this is a narrative-changing game for them. It's one of the reasons why I say that maybe a little bit of the kind of desperation and charge that could potentially come from this game could work in New Orleans' favor. This one is one of those matchups for New Orleans where, if they come off these 2 more disappointing and in some ways fluky losses, because there's a lot of conversation about how the opposite of what you just talked about, to where you were saying Kansas City's 4-0 now, but they could be much worse. A lot of people look at the New Orleans Saints and say, man, they're 2-2, but they could be much better if 1 or 2 things roll their way. So which one of these teams gets the good fortune to break their way might actually be the thing. Beyond the injuries, beyond the trenches, beyond the pass rush, all that other stuff, it just might be who gets the break in this one that ends up having the lasting impact on the win-loss records.
Well, and you talk about games that are coming up. The Raiders, Bucks, and the Broncos follow the 49ers after the Saints game. So it is going to be a little bit easier. Obviously, the Bucks are a better team than I would have thought that they were going to be. But
sure.
Going up against a team, against the Raiders that don't really have a QB to speak of, I feel a little bit better about than going up against a team that, obviously, I think the Saints can be a good team. And you're right. They're just a couple of plays away. You take away that Dallas Goedert touchdown that Dallas Goedert catch. That game is completely different. And I will admit, I didn't think Koo had a chance at making that field goal. So I did not think he had that leg.
Yeah. I think it's my fault. I don't think I've ever seen that guy miss a field goal. So I blame that. I blame that all on myself. So Chris, what do you think about a prediction for this matchup? Where are you going with this one?
For me, I think that I feel better about this game than I probably have felt against the Chargers game. And I say that because, like I said earlier, they know Derek Carr. They have a pretty good idea of how to defend him. The thing that is curious to me, and that I'm really curious to see what the Saints do, is, Olave, does he play? If he plays, changes things for me. Kamara can change things as well. Obviously, the offensive line is going to be hurt for the Saints, so that tends to favor Kansas City in some regard. But if they can't get pass rush and they allow Derek Carr to sit back there, he's going to find openings. He's not incapable of being a good quarterback. It's just a question of, can he get it done on game day? And the Chiefs have had to blitz a lot, and that can be a problem, especially going up against a veteran quarterback. So to me, I think Kansas City still finds a way to win this game. My bigger thing is that I would wish that I could feel like the Chiefs would score, 27, 28 points. I don't know that they're going to get that done. So I'm going to go 24-20 Kansas City.
Very close to me. I think this game really, there's a world in which this game goes either way. And I think it comes down to, can the Saints run the ball? Can the Saints not run the ball? In addition to some of our trench talk that we've spoken about. If the Saints can't run the football, I think this is 23-20 in favor of the Chiefs. If the Saints can run the football and control the clock and kind of do some of the things that they did over the course of the first 2 weeks with being a little bit more explosive, then obviously it's a bit of a different conversation, maybe 23-20 the other way. But as of right now, based on not knowing the health of this team, I think this is Kansas City game 23-20. So I would take the Saints against the spread, but not necessarily taking the Saints to pull off the full on upset in this one. So that's the way that I'm looking at it as well.
Ross is great. Chris is great. And for more on those two teams, check Ross out over at Locked On Saints and Chris out over at Locked On Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That'll do it for the Ultimate NFL pregame show here in week 5. We'll have much more content coming your way next week, breaking down all of the incredible matchups of week 6. An amazing week 5 is on the horizon, though, so I'm going to enjoy it. Hopefully, everybody enjoys it as well. Thank you for tuning in to the show. We'll be back here next week on the Ultimate NFL pregame show. Enjoy your Sunday of football. We'll talk soon.